want. It's great to be back in the centre of the known universe, Merthyr Tydfil, sometimes referred to as Mirth Vegas, due to the number of fruit machines in the local Witherspoons. Now I'm going to start with an apology. I'm not going to be talking about UFOs this evening. I know a lot of people come to see me talk about that subject. That's because I did cover that subject quite a lot in my recent TV series, and what I'm going to talk about today is everything that I haven't been allowed to put on television. I'm also... Let me just say though, if you're familiar with this film that I produced a little while ago called UFOs and NATO, the Human Mutilation Cover-Up, a very dark film about alleged cases of human mutilations on Brecon Beacons, someone who's featured in this film, Derek Goff, is actually in the audience if anyone wants to go and speak to him. That's Derek Goff, who was the person who was originally approached by the military source. He sat at the back if you want to go and converse with him this evening. Another subject I will not be covering this evening is much of what I would describe as fabricated terror, such as Jihadi Johnny or the creation of ISIS and that kind of thing. And that's because I've spent probably the last 3 months working very hard on 2 new documentaries, which I'm going to be releasing on this tour, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about this evening. Okay, here's this year's embarrassing photograph. I was taken back in the days when I used to wear a tie. Clearly as cynical then as I am now. This is an official school photograph. Here are my siblings. My brother, older brother, clearly undermined control even then. All right. Now I've split today's talk up into 2 sections. I'm going to speak for about 90 minutes. So if you want to get a drink while I'm speaking, that's not a problem. And I've entitled it Subversion in the UK. We'll have about a 15-minute break, and then I'll speak in part 2 for about 45 minutes, where I'm going to look at international subversion and interplanetary subversion. Okay, so I mentioned that I've produced 2 new films. The first one is called Patsy Driver, and is an independent investigation into the Cumbria shootings. Now, these occurred in June 2010, just under 5 years ago. Glorious summer's day. A taxi driver got up, got in his taxi, went round the local countryside, murdered 12 people with a shotgun and a rifle, injured 11 others for no apparent reason. And I was suspicious of this event right from word go, and in December 2013 I've started my own detailed investigation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this film in today's talk. The second film that I'm launching on this tour is another Madeleine McCann expose, entitled The Phantoms. Now, this is a 3-hour film. The first one is a 2-hour film, so I don't have time to go through all of the evidence in both these films in today's talk. But briefly, the new Madeleine film is all about people who claim to have seen an abductor with a child in their arms on the night Madeleine was reported missing. And it examines with a fine-tooth comb their statements and asks or looks at the credibility of those statements. Okay, so the first film, Patsy Driver, as I said, Derek Bird, 2nd of June 2010, just gets up one morning, no apparent reason, goes and kills 12 people. Now, I've been back to the area, or I've been to the area 4 times now, and each time I've spent 3 or 4 days there, and I've tracked down quite a lot of first-hand witnesses. There were 24 shooting locations, and at those locations there were 90 witnesses. Of those 90 witnesses, I've managed to speak to 36. Of those, 26 have given me testimony about what they saw. So I've got quite a good picture of what happened in these events, and I would even go as far as to say that I now know more about this case than anyone other than those who have seen the official police files. And I do not agree with the verdict of the inquest. I'm going to show you a quick clip from the film. And 2 of these locations were captured on CCTV. But why have I not been able to find any images which clearly show Derek Bird with a gun in his hand in Whitehaven, or anywhere else that day? I repeat, I cannot find a single clear image in the public domain showing Derek Bird with a gun in his hand.
He was a quiet person, but a nice guy. He's a nice guy, he's a pleasant guy.
He had a very, very nice temperament, and he was always very, very charming.
From a decent family and in a decent and very beautiful neighbourhood.
A family man.
You know, if you had a child, Derek, can you just look after this? We will last for an hour because I've got a crisis, yeah?
Yeah.
He wouldn't have even thought twice about it.
He's not violent, he's not overly aggressive.
He was a reasonable lad who went about his business apparently in the right way.
And, you know, once you got to know him, you could have a laugh and a joke. I've spent many a time at motocross meetings with him, you know, like socialising as you do, you know, having a drink after the race meetings and having a laugh and a joke about what's happened.
There wasn't any underlying reason.
Somebody said, oh, it's Derek Bird, it's a taxi driver. And I said, oh, no, we know the lad. Surely he hasn't been shot. And then they said, no, I think it's him that's done the shootings. And I said, oh, never.
So were you surprised when you found out it was him that had supposedly done these shootings then?
Absolutely gobsmacked. Out of character.
You can't believe what's happened.
And then I heard two noises. I didn't even know there was shotgun at the time. It was just two really loud bangs. Then it seemed like 30 seconds a minute, stirring at us, and then phew, off he went.
So he stared at you for 30 seconds at least?
At least, yeah.
Right. So you got a good look at him?
Yeah.
I've got two pictures of Derek Bird here.
Yeah.
Because obviously what you've said contradicts the picture.
It does, yeah.
Right.
The person that I thought that I'd saw was probably late 20s and black spiky hair.
What was the length of the hair?
Probably inch and a half, spiked up.
Okay. Now there's a description of a younger man on the police website as well, which was released about 11 AM that morning. Now the two conclusions I come to, or two beliefs I now hold, having examined this case. The first, I do believe that Derek Bird was under mind control, and second, I believe there was at least one other gunman. Now I've looked at all of the 24 shooting locations and tried to get all of the media statements and as many witness statements as I can. And if you look through them, you find lots and lots of witnesses from the second murder, because there's no hard evidence that Bird was involved in the first two murders, but from the second murder onwards, he's described as his eyes wide and staring, blank look on his face, expressionless, again and again and again. This is what witnesses describe him as. In my opinion, that's describing someone under mind control. And we've seen there the witness saying that the gunman was in his 20s with short dark hair. That cannot be a description of Derek Bird. But there's 2 hours of evidence in these programs. Now, I also look at potential motives as to why this operation may have been carried out. And I do provide quite a compelling one for the murder of the second person, that's Kevin Commons, a solicitor who was taking legal action against United Utilities. I suspect he was the real target of these incidents. Which means that, if I am correct, that the verdict of the official inquest is also incorrect. Now, about halfway through the shootings, there's a place called Thornhill. Now, one of our witnesses seen there in my film, he describes being overtaken by the gunman. And he knows it was the gunman because the quarter panel glass was out. He gave a statement to the police, and he said the gunman did not turn into the Thornhill estate. He continued on and turned on the dual carriageway and turned left, where other shootings took place. And I've also got two witnesses at Thornhill estate saying that the gunman was in a maroon vehicle, right? When the gunman's vehicle, or Bird's vehicle, well, it's similar to that you can see on the screen. It was a silver colour. Now, these witnesses' testimonies suggest to me there was a second gunman. Now, because those witnesses' testimonies don't corroborate, they don't match, what you would expect is the coroner to get all of those witnesses at the inquest and cross-examine them in front of the jury to try and find out what really happened. None of those witnesses were asked to give evidence at the inquest. So I suspect that Coroner Roberts and Chief Superintendent Slattery, I hypothesise in the documentary that they were running that inquest to ensure that the verdict was that of what had already been put out by the mainstream media. And just to touch on mainstream media, the BBC were in Whitehaven before 12 o'clock. Now, the police didn't release that there'd been any shootings until around about 11 o'clock. It's 2.25 hour drive from the headquarters, Look North, the BBC, to Whitehaven. So how did they get there so quick? That's another area which suggests that there was foreknowledge. Okay. Now, many of you will have seen my films about Madeleine McCann, Buried by Mainstream Media, the true story of Madeleine McCann. If you haven't seen them, please go and watch them online. They're free of charge to watch. And just to reiterate the reason why I made these films, I've been campaigning now for quite a lot of years to try and get our media to tell the truth and stop lying about 9/11, the London bombings and many, many other issues. And I wanted to expose mainstream media for the tricks that they get up to. And I saw this case as probably the best case to do that with. And that's why I chose to make this 4-hour-long documentary. In order to expose what mainstream media truly are, which I would describe as perception management propagandists. They're not about telling you the truth. But it seems that they're not only using news media in order to cover up the real facts about Madeleine McCann, they're also using TV dramas to manipulate people's perception of reality. Anyone see this? The Missing? 8 hours of it. 8 hours of it. In order to manipulate the public's perception as to the risks pertaining to having your child abducted if you go on a foreign holiday. That's all this is, in my opinion. This would have cost millions and millions of pounds to make. And if you don't think this is connected to the Madeleine McCann case, I suggest you do some thinking. Okay, now in December last year, after my documentaries got quite a lot of views online, over 250,000 views, I decided it was time to tell the mainstream media about these documentaries. So I emailed all of these mainstream publications, the whole of mainstream print media, including the BBC and Newsnight. And this is what I said to them in my email. I am the producer of a new film about the Madeleine McCann case. The film is the most comprehensive investigative documentary ever produced on the case and is over 4 hours long. The film has now been watched by over 250,000. It's approaching 500,000 now. Slowly, the British public are learning the truth about the Madeleine McCann case. The facts of the case are quite straightforward and are covered in detail, but these facts seem to have been obscured by the many baseless stories that have been put out over the last 7 years in the media. I would be happy to be interviewed by your newspaper about this new documentary. The film is fully independent and has not been subject to interference by certain government agencies. Hence, it is closer to the truth than anything produced before now. If you go online and read the thousands of viewers' comments about the film, you will see that it has been very well received. I am currently working on another film about the McCanns, which will uncover more information which has not been featured in the media. I can give you information about that should you be interested. I am willing to meet with your newspaper to be interviewed about why I made these films and tell you more about them. Okay, so I never received a single reply from any of these newspapers when I sent that email. Now, I did receive an email from someone claiming to be a freelance journalist a few weeks ago. This is somebody called Jenny Kleeman, who has been featured on Sky News a lot, discussing the newspapers. She's done reports on The One show, Channel 4, so she's all over mainstream media. And she said in her email, "Dear Richard D. Hall, I am a freelance journalist. I'm making a film for The Guardian's website about the growing number of people who believe the mainstream media isn't asking the right questions about the disappearance of Madeleine McCann." So right there, she's making a documentary about what people believe. Not the facts of the case, what people believe. Time and again I've been referred to your documentaries on the subject, which I found intriguing. Now, I've had hundreds of emails from people who've watched my documentaries. Nobody has described them as intriguing. People describe them as compelling. I read with interest that you have a new documentary coming out as well as a forthcoming speaking tour. I'd value the opportunity to interview you and see you in action at one of your talks in late March or early April. Is there a telephone number I could reach you on to discuss this? So I replied to Jenny Kleeman and I said, yeah, I'd love to be involved or be featured in a film for The Guardian's website, but I've got 3 conditions. The first is that you focus on the facts of the case, not on what people believe. The second is that you allow me to see what you produce so that I can have final approval. So if I'm not happy with anything within it, you can then change it. And third, you place links to my documentaries wherever you feature your documentary. So several emails were exchanged, and in those emails I gathered that Kleeman is not really responsible for the edit. She's just collecting video testimonies for somebody else. So I got her to request these conditions of her string pullers. She came back. I've looked through your requests and spoken to my editors. We can't agree to your conditions. As a documentary maker yourself, I'm sure you can appreciate that ceding editorial control to one of your interviewees is simply not ethical or possible, and neither I nor The Guardian could agree to it. Well, I wasn't asking for editorial control, I was asking for final approval. And this is why we never get any truth in our mainstream media, because they never allow anyone to see anything that they produce when they include subjects in their documentaries. So, having given her my conditions to appear in this documentary, which, keep your eyes peeled for it because it'll be coming out soon, and I suspect it's going to be a hit piece, probably a hit piece in order to manage the growing number of people who are finding out the truth about Madeleine McCann. She turns up with a cameraman at my Nottingham venue, wanting to interview me, after not agreeing to my conditions. And then she starts interviewing people coming out from my talk, asking their opinions on Madeleine McCann. So there's something brewing in the mainstream with regards to Madeleine McCann. Keep your eyes peeled for it, because in my opinion it'll just be a load of disinformation. Alright, and staying on the subject of mainstream media, I've said it before, and I'll say it again, that I don't think newspaper stands or newspapers are there to make money, because you can buy a story without buying a newspaper. Many people are turning their TVs off now. I've thrown my TV set out the window a long time ago. I don't watch it. And you can opt to do that. You can opt not to watch television, but you cannot opt not to go and get your groceries. We're forced to see these newspaper stands, and they seem to be everywhere now. There was a time when you had to go into a newsagent's in order to see these disgusting mainstream headlines. I read somewhere that Lidl and Aldi, now more than 50% of the population do their shopping at Lidl and Aldi. And suddenly we see newspaper stands in Lidl and Aldi, which were never there before. They're on garage forecourts, they're everywhere, and they're not there to make money. They're there so that you buy that story on the headline, goes straight into your subconscious, another Cyril Smith cover-up, or Clarkson bullshit. Straight into your subconscious. You cannot elect not to see this shit, right? So I'm wanting to start a campaign against Lidl, Aldi's and other shops which do not need to stock this shit, and say to them, right, until you remove that from your shops, I will not be buying my groceries from there. We need to stand up to it, because as I said, you can turn your television off, but you cannot get rid of this propaganda. I mean, just the point about them not making money, just look at the Metro newspaper. It's free. They're giving you their propaganda away because enough people aren't buying these. Alright, now last year I stood here and I gave my beliefs on the Madeleine McCann case, but these beliefs are based on evidence. And if you haven't seen the films, I suggest you watch them, because these beliefs might surprise you if you haven't seen the films. But just to point out one piece of evidence, the cadaver dog evidence. Eddie, the cadaver dog, alerted to the smell of the past presence of a human corpse in 11 locations associated with the McCanns. It was in the apartment, it was on Kate McCann's clothes, it was on Madeleine's toy, and it was on their car, and it was on the key. So that evidence is very, very compelling if you watch it, but it's not been put out vastly in the mainstream media. So my beliefs on the Madeleine McCann case are, and this is, you would need to see 4 hours of documentary in order to understand why I believe all of this. That Madeleine McCann died in April or May 2007. I believe Madeleine McCann's corpse was situated in the McCann's holiday apartment for a period of time. I believe Madeleine McCann's corpse was transported in the McCann's Renault Scenic hire car some weeks after she died. I believe there has been a high-level cover-up about what really happened. I believe there is a reason for the high-level cover-up which goes further than most people have contemplated. And I believe the story represents the best opportunity to expose mainstream media. Now, in the last talk, I said that I wasn't prepared to expand on this. The reason that I think there is a reason for the high-level cover-up which occurred. I'm going to try and shed some light on that today. Now, I made much use of this slide in my films, and this slide explains how the cover-up has operated over the last 8 years. The central person is a guy called Clarence Mitchell, the government's senior media spin doctor, who was effectively given to the McCanns in order to provide them protection from the media. A limited company was set up by the McCanns, which I've termed the McCann team, and that McCann team used at least 3 rogue private detective agencies. And I'm confident to stand here and say that they were all rogue in one way or another, because Numerous people have served prison sentences who were associated with those private investigation agencies. And their role, largely, it seems, was to produce bogus stories which were fed into our media. The stories that you've read on front page headlines for the last 8 years about Madeleine McCann, vast majority of them misled the public, predominantly to try and trick the public into thinking that there had been an abduction. We know that intelligence agencies have been involved in this case, from people such as Gonçalo Amaral. Gary Hagland has links to MI6, and others as well, such as we had Control Risks Group were involved. We know that Gordon Brown lent on the Portuguese investigation into Madeleine and trying to get them to change certain ways that they were running that investigation, so no one can really dispute this chart. But in order to shed light on that question, let's go back to a time before Madeleine was reported missing and redraw this chart, okay, before that holiday. Well, clearly Clarence Mitchell wasn't involved until 3 days after Madeleine's reported missing. We didn't have any private detective agencies, obviously. The media were not aware of Madeleine McCann before the holiday. And of course the Portuguese police were not investigating the case, so we can get rid of that. But can we go any further, right? So the question I'm asking in today's talk is, were the McCanns, or one of the McCanns, known to intelligence agencies before the 2007 holiday? Now, there's no hard evidence and there's no proof that they were, or one of them was, right? But I'm going to show you some circumstantial evidence at the end of this talk, which is very interesting, that I think you might want to see. So I'm going to park that question there. Were the McCanns known to intelligence agencies before their 2007 holiday? And I'm going to show you some, as I said, I'm going to show you some evidence later on in the talk. Because if they were, and I'm not saying they were, if they were, it would certainly explain this rapid cover-up. Now, this is my list of beliefs on the Madeleine McCann case. I'm going to add one to this. I believe the Detective Chief Inspector Andy Redwood, who led the Scotland Yard investigation to allegedly find Madeleine, should be arrested. I believe he should be arrested for attempting to pervert the course of justice, because I believe he has fabricated evidence. And this is the evidence that I believe he has fabricated. And he showed this evidence to over 7 million people in October 2013 on Crime Watch UK. Now, in order to understand why I believe this is a piece of fabricated evidence, you'd need to watch my new film on Madeleine McCann called The Phantoms, which, as I said, examines with a fine-tooth comb all of the statements people have come up with that somebody was seen walking away from the apartment with a child. 3 hours, 3-hour documentary, which I haven't got time to go into all of the evidence today. Now, but just as a starter for 10 with this, how many people recognise that name? Wojciech Krakowski, in connection with the McCanns. Anyone? Anyone in the audience know that name? I've asked this question to 11 audiences now, and one person on my whole tour, that's out of about 1,000 people, is known. Sorry, there's somebody over there.
Was he the Russian spin doctor that put in the whole idea about how to use the media in order to basically mind control the public into doing the party's ideology?
No, he wasn't. All right. Wojciech Krakowski, here's a picture of him. Now, I'm not surprised that you all don't know who Wojciech Krakowski is, because he's one of the most important people to know about in order to understand how the Portuguese police were misled. And just think of how many media headlines we've had about Madeleine McCann. Thousands over the last 8 years, probably more headlines than any other subject. And they haven't told you about Wojciech Krakowski. Here he is here. This is a photograph from the Portuguese police files. All right? Now, in order to explain the importance of Wojciech Krakowski, on the night Madeleine was reported missing, one of the McCann's friends, Jane Tanner, made a statement to the Portuguese police saying that she saw a man carrying a child away from the apartment. Now, just over 2 weeks later, there was another person came forward, or another family came forward, the Smith family, and they said that they saw a person carrying a child away from the apartment about 600 yards away, but about 45 minutes later. So that's 2 sightings of somebody carrying a child away from the apartment on that evening. But there was a third sighting, or a third incident, reported to the police, shortly after Madeleine was reported missing. Somebody called Nuno Lourenço contacts the Portuguese police and says that somebody tried to abduct his little blonde daughter, very similar to Madeleine, in a place called Sagres, 16 miles west of Praia da Luz, where the McCanns were staying. So the Portuguese took a detailed statement from him, and he gave a very detailed description of the man who was supposed to have come into a pastry shop and attempted to abduct his child and then fled in a car. Now, Nuno Lourenço gave the Portuguese police a description of the car, a description of the man, and also a partial number plate, and he managed to get a partial photograph of that vehicle. So the Portuguese police obviously thought, well, this is probably the man that's taken Madeleine. So they managed to trace the man who was in that car, and it was Wojciech Krakowski, who was on holiday in the area with his partner. So they traced him, and he'd got on a plane shortly before Madeleine's reported missing, and he's back in Poland where he lives. So they got Interpol to go and connect him, but they completely ruled him out of their investigation. Wasn't involved in Madeleine's disappearance. And it seems now that there's huge question mark over this Nuno Lourenço's statement, whether or not this even happened. Because there are no, as far as I'm aware of, there's no independent witnesses to this man attempting to take a child in a pastry shop. And also, it's very strange that Nuno Lourenço only reported that his daughter was attempted to be abducted 6 days later, just after Madeleine was reported missing. And here's the clincher. The description of Wojciech Krakowski is almost identical to the man Jane Tanner described, and is also almost identical to what the Smith family described. It is the hypothesis of this new film that all these sightings may be based on a real person, on a patsy, Wojciech Krakowski. And this was possibly all fabricated in order to mislead the Portuguese police into believing that there had been an abduction. But as I say, it's a 3-hour-long film, and I'm not surprised that no one has heard of Wojciech Krakowski. Okay, I'm just going to show you a brief clip from this film, because I actually went to try and I did speak to one of the McCann's private investigators.
Now, the person that mainstream media should have doorstepped, I have come to try and speak to today. That is somebody called, and I'm sitting outside the block of flats where he lives. Worked for the McCanns for 6 months, and in that 6 months he had an insight into the true investigation, quotes, investigation, into allegedly trying to find Madeleine. This man, who worked for the McCanns for 6 months, told me that he forensically examined all of Jane Tanner's statements, as we have just done, and he thought that none of what she said could have happened.
Right, so that's the McCann's own employed private investigator saying that he didn't believe their friend's statements about there being an abduction. Now, he told me, I actually sat with him for 3 hours, and one thing he told me was that their job was to examine the McCann's mail. And he said that he began to get really suspicious when a lot of that mail was unopened. If your daughter's gone missing and you're wanting to look at every lead, are you gonna leave your mail unopened? He told me a lot of other things, much of which I haven't made public because I'm not sure how much of it was actually true, what he was telling me. Now, just to recap on the films, the first film is 4 hours. The second film looks specifically at claims of an abduction, 3-hour-long film. And there may be more coming out, because I'm intending this to be the definitive account of the whole McCann affair. Because one film that could potentially be made is all about the timeline from Madeleine being reported missing backwards. Okay? Because that would shed light on when Madeleine may have died. Okay? Now, I have tried to get these documentaries on my TV show, Rich Planet TV, but the TV company have refused to air them. Basically because I haven't got any balls, it's as simple as that. So they've refused to air the Madeleine documentaries. I also asked them if they would air the Patsy Driver film that you saw a clip of there. They've refused to air that. They refused to air a film I made about a horse mutilation case called Silent Killers in Sussex. They refused to air certain comments made by Max Burns about certain ufologists. They also refused to air an interview that I did with Dr. Nick Colostrom, and all we were doing was discussing MP's letters that had been written to Rich Planet viewers after Rich Planet viewers had given them 40 pages of documents asserting that the London bombings were probably a staged or fabricated terror event. And some of those letters were very, very interesting. I was really annoyed when they refused to air this programme, because all we were doing was discussing letters we got from MPs, and they wouldn't even air that. And it was the culmination of a lot of work, because I'd run a campaign from sort of September 2012 to encourage Rich Planet viewers to go to their MPs and to get reply letters. I collected all of these reply letters from MPs, and then we'd set up a TV programme, and we discussed all the letters, and then they wouldn't put it on television. In fact, they've made it clear to me that any programme that challenges accepted narratives of any recent story, they're not prepared to air. So I'll give you an example. Here's an email from the TV company. It says, everyone remember the Rosetta spacecraft last year, which supposedly landed on the side of a comet? It says here, we also won't be able to air a show on the Rosetta spacecraft and whether it's fact or fiction. It's too prominent in the news and could upset a few folk. So this is what I'm up against with the TV company that I'm providing my TV shows to. And each programme that I air, I have to pay them £600, yet they're censoring a lot of my most important material. And the excuse they're really using with certain ones, say the Madeline one, the Patsy Driver one, and I would say this one, the London bombings one, they're saying that if there's an official story where someone has been harmed, murdered or killed or whatever, or is missing, what have you, yeah, that if you challenge that accepted narrative and you say, well, I don't think it happened that way, I think it happened this way, they say, well, that could cause offence to the relatives, so we're not going to put it out. So that's the excuse they're using for challenging accepted narratives. So much for freedom of speech. Okay, now last year I did a survey to try and find out Britain's most subversive TV programme, and Rich Planet viewers voted the BBC News the most subversive show on television. And this year I'm launching a new survey.
Now, I'm asking you to take part in another subversion survey to try and find out the most subversive and manipulative false hero or role model. What do you mean by that, Richard? Well, if we look at former KGB agent Yuri Bezmenov's subversion chart, we see that one of the ways of subverting an entire nation is to use what he calls false heroes and role models. These are people who are promoted in the mainstream media to the masses in order to manipulate the masses into following particular ideals, follow particular morals, beliefs, and live particular lifestyles which are subtly promoted by the fake role model. I could give you a list as long as one's arm of my particular favourite subversive fake heroes, but I want you to do it for me. Brian Cox. Now, who would you vote for? Please email me your suggestion and I will compile a league table of the most subversive heroes and role models. Don't forget to state why you think they are fake and why their fake behaviour is subversive.
Alright, so here's the results of the 2015 False Hero and Role Model Survey. Brian Cox, number 1. Had nothing to do with me. Right, I'm going to read out some comments. These are Rich Planet viewers' comments. They're not my comments about these fake heroes. Brian Cox. I'm cleverer than you lot, and I'm telling you in a pally way that everything is as the science book says it is. This viewer says, his statement about intelligent life and that in his opinion there has never been intelligent life in the universe because we would have heard from them stunned me to the core. Next viewer says, he made dismissive, smug comments about UFO sightings with his usual stupid, effeminate smirk on his face. This viewer says, I would like to nominate Brian Cox because that's what I was told to say by a subliminal message on some TV programme I was watching. Also, he's a complete arse. But for me, it's what Brian Cox doesn't talk about that makes him subversive. Yeah? Why doesn't Brian Cox talk about the most important book written this century? Where Did the Towers Go? By former Professor of Engineering Mechanics Dr. Judy Wood, which proves that the World Trade Center towers didn't even hit the ground. They were turned to dust in midair, which could not have been caused by aeroplanes. Why doesn't Brian Cox talk about Flight 175 on 9/11 and the totally impossible physics of Flight 175? Why doesn't Brian Cox talk about the technology of cold fusion, which was suppressed in 1989, and if it hadn't been suppressed, it could have gotten the world off fossil fuels? Why doesn't Brian Cox talk about over-unity devices, such as the Bedini motor? Why doesn't Brian Cox talk about anti-gravity research? Why doesn't Brian Cox talk about the Byfield-Brown effect, which some say has been developed into anti-gravity propulsion? Why doesn't Brian Cox talk about theoretical physicist Mikhail Alcubierre's mathematical model, where space around an object is shifted so that the object would arrive at its destination faster than light would in normal space? Why doesn't Brian Cox talk about the thousands of pilots that have reported seeing UFOs? And why doesn't Brian Cox talk about the evidence of Professor Emil Schweitzer, Belgium's top radar expert, who examined radar data from a UFO? The UFO travelled horizontally, did a right angle turn and went up vertically, and at the point of the turn pulled a corner of 30G. Why doesn't Brian Cox talk about images allegedly coming back from the Opportunity rover, which experts say is a crinoid fossil? Why doesn't Brian Cox talk about the structure of the quantum vacuum? Why doesn't Brian Cox talk about researchers such as Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, who have scientifically studied phenomena such as psychic phenomena? Well, the reason is because Brian Cox's job is to keep the public's mind focused on a GCSE level science. That's it. And to fool people into thinking there's nothing worth knowing in science outside of that, when the reality is there's a vast amount that is being covered up. And just for your own entertainment, here's the man himself.
Students from Highbury Primary School ask, when something enters a black hole, what happens next?
Now that's a brilliant question. The quick answer is, we don't know.
Now, dark matter. Lots of students have been asking the simple question, what is it?
Great question, don't know.
Noah from TAFE SA asks, is maths the language of the universe?
Yes. Why that is the case, we don't know. Being baffled is a great position to be in, I think.
Absolutely.
And then you go and try and unbaffle yourself. That's the definition of science, I would say.
Amina from Tilapia Park asks, how is the human brain linked to the cosmos?
What is it to be me then, to be you? What is it to be alive and conscious? And the answer is, we don't know.
Mandy from Darwin High School and Matthew from Gungahlin College ask, will we ever be able to travel faster than the speed of light?
Well, Mandy and Matthew, I think the answer is no.
Now, the idea of life on other planets. Students from Highbury Primary School ask, is there life on other planets? Aliens even?
It's as I said at the start, it's one of the questions I really want to know, and I think we might answer very soon. Obviously, if there isn't any, we'll never answer the question. As I mentioned earlier, the life on Mars, we're looking for that very seriously. Why? Because we think there's a chance that certainly a chance that it did exist at some point in the past, because we know water flowed over the surface of Mars. But we also strongly suspect that there's water below the surface of Mars now. And so any microbes that evolved perhaps many billions of years ago could have survived subsurface. So we may find life on Mars. So I think that's potentially one of the great discoveries that, it's a guess again, it's not a particularly scientific thing to say. The reason we build big spacecraft to go and land on Mars is because we want to look. So we don't know. If we knew, we wouldn't go and build a spacecraft to go and have a look.
Otto from Carlingford High School asks, following the discovery of the Higgs boson at CERN, what's the next great big experiment for physics?
Well, the Large Hadron Collider at CERN will continue to be one of the next great experiments. The thing about the Higgs boson is, yes, we've discovered it, or we've discovered a Higgs boson. But now what we have to do is we have to understand it. We have to do experiments. We have to characterize it, understand how it works precisely, understand whether it's the only one. There are theories of particle physics that suggest there isn't just one Higgs boson. There might be more than one. There might be 5 of them. They might have different properties. So which one is it? And the answer to that is, we're not sure. We don't know.
All right. Now remember what he said there. He said, we might find microbes on Mars. So according to him, there's no life on Mars. And that links into something I'm going to talk about in part 2. All right, looking at number 2 on our false heroes and role models survey is Russell Brand. This viewer says, trapping young folk who are angry and see no point in the system the way it is. His anti-establishment facade began, in my opinion, with the Andrew Sachs phone message nonsense, which was pushed hard in everyone's face to present him as the bad boy and the darling of the youth. His current foray into politics is quite unlike the guy who used to be on MTV, capable of nothing more than tormenting people high on drugs at festivals for a cheap laugh. To me, this about-face screams coaching. So this Rich Planet viewer thinks that Russell Brand has been coached to become political. Not to mention his links with Katy Perry, who has question marks over who owns her mind. This viewer says, offers hope to truthers as he has a mainstream media voice for some reason, but his ideas are full of confusion and contradiction. This viewer says, claims to be leading a revolt against capitalism, but dates a Rothschild and sells his book, is also filthy rich. I believe he is being used for controlled opposition to lead people astray. At number 3 on the false heroes list is David Beckham. This viewer says, he is thicker than a whale omelette. And it is a totally manipulated figure. Even as I type this, has said he will continue in his United Nations role. He has not the intellect to hold the conversation. At number 4 on the list would get my vote, Stephen Fry. Here he is. This viewer says, regularly pops up, voicing his opinions on various matters, the implication being that he is so intelligent that he knows better than us what is correct, and thus his opinions are to be noted and followed. Has a show where he tells us that only he knows the real answers. Soon people start to believe all of the crap that comes out of his mouth. This viewer says, was quick to condemn Putin regarding apparently anti-homosexual legislation, but strangely keeps quiet about Qatar and other Middle East countries, where being gay can actually get you flogged or even worse. This inconsistency shows he's actually part of the global agenda and not an opinionated private person. He's also wheeled out to add to the global warming, climate change believers. He's also part of the LGBT mind control. That stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. If you are gay, you're supposed to want to throw in your lot with lesbians and also transgender people. Now, here's some pictures of Stephen Fry with his husband, Stephen Fry's husband. I put this picture up at Glasgow and somebody shouted out, "Is that Brian Cox?" So, we've made a good pair of subversives. Yeah, can I share with you what goes through my mind when I look at those photographs? Dare I? What goes through my mind is this. Is Stephen Fry being controlled today by things which may have occurred in his past? All right, at number 5 is Katie Price, Jordan, whose only talent is having enhanced you-know-whats. Number 6, the royal family. Well, we could do a whole show on the royal family. The royal family are a massive global marketing ploy. At number 7, Stephen Hawking. He's disabled, don't you know? He seems to reinforce the idea that we are all matter. There is no spirituality. Jeremy Kyle at number 8. Have you ever wondered why this man appears in the daytime bracket? It's about the time when people are feeling good about their day, and as soon as they watch that demented freak, it's feel-bad time. I have witnessed a number of people who have bought into this brainwashing and social conditioning format of TV, and they too have acted like that towards the subject when it comes up in a conversation. At number 9, Bob Geldof. The UK sent £20 million to help Ebola, which I think is all a scam. At number 10, David Cameron. Goes without saying, I think. I believe he is controlled and told what to say by others. At number 11, Russell Howard. Must be controlled and scripted by MI5 or whoever. My wife likes him, but even she can see that something's wrong. This person says, spouts BBC and government propaganda all over the place. Something very sinister about this shit. I have often seen him rubbishing any ideas that aren't mainstream thinking, including recently Sheldrake's ideas about a pet's sixth sense. Now, Russell Howard, he does criticise mainstream media, in particular the Daily Mail, but he does it in a way that everything's ridiculous. The stories are just silly or stupid. He doesn't actually ask why they're written the way they are and whether there's an agenda behind those stories. So hence, he actually hides the motives of mainstream media, in my opinion. Number 12, Bono. Sat on a fortune of £600 million, but begs the average person in this country to help Africa. At number 13, Simon Cowell, the flagship bearer of the fame before intellect generation. Simon Cowell is a symbol of everything wrong with our society. 3 people actually voted for all MPs, and 3 people voted for Anton Deck, the seemingly innocent Anton Deck. Openly promote the degradation of game show contestants as a means of desensitising and denormalising public perceptions relating to the effects of mental and physical cruelty, abuse and borderline torture, all dressed up as family entertainment. And I don't think it's an accident that they've chosen 2 such innocent-looking chaps to present torture and cruelty. Okay. Now, in the category of science, we've already looked at these guys, Cox and Stephen Hawking. At number 3 on the science league is Richard Dawkins. Now, Dawkins made a lot of TV programmes bashing religion and promoting the idea of evolution and Darwinism, but he doesn't really tackle any of the huge flaws in the theory of evolution. He made one series called The Enemies of Reason, and in that series, he went to interview Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, who I've met and interviewed. Now, Rupert Sheldrake has done research into psychic phenomena and animals' possible psychic abilities, this kind of thing. So they go into Sheldrake's house, and the cameraman films from the side with Dawkins and Sheldrake sort of in a confrontational conversation. So Dawkins pipes up that in a romantic spirit, he himself would like to believe in telepathy, but there just wasn't any evidence for it. He dismissed all research on the subject out of hand. He said that if it really occurred, it would turn the laws of physics upside down, and added extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So Sheldrake replied, well, this depends on what you regard as extraordinary. Most people say they have experienced telepathy, especially in connection with telephone calls. In that sense, telepathy is ordinary. The claim that most people are deluded about their own experience is extraordinary. Where's the extraordinary evidence for that? So then they both agreed that controlled experiments were necessary. Sheldrake said that this is why he had actually been doing such experiments, including tests to find out if people really could tell who was calling them on the telephone when the caller was selected at random. The results were far above the chance level. The previous week, Sheldrake had sent Dawkins copies of some of his papers, published in peer-reviewed journals, so that he could look at the data. Dawkins seemed uneasy and said, I don't want to discuss evidence. Why not? Sheldrake asked. There isn't time. It's too complicated. And that's not what this programme is about. The camera stopped. So I think Sheldrake has exposed what the likes of Dawkins is up to on mainstream television. And it seems to me that they're trying to keep the public's mindset focused on that the world is just made of atoms and that's it. All you are is a biological computer. There's no soul, there's no spirituality. Because if we just consider space for a moment, I actually believe that matter or atoms are trapped light. And we've discussed this in some of my previous shows. But light is a vibration through space, or of space, of the fabric of space itself. So space and matter and atoms are all part of the same continuum. So it's very important to consider space when you're considering reality. I would actually argue that space itself is more important than atoms. And Sheldrake has looked into a lot of this. I'll give you an example. Sheldrake actually believes that your long-term memory is not stored inside your head. And there's a lot of evidence for this. I actually agree with him, that your brain is more like, this for your long-term memory, not your short-term memory. Your brain is more like a tuning device, and it's actually accessing those memories from somewhere in space. He calls it morphic resonance. And there's a lot of evidence for this, but it's not put forward fairly in mainstream television. I mean, we could also look at other things such as the non-physical world, which again is completely poo-pooed in mainstream. Nigel Kerner refers to a universe where you have space, atoms, light, matter, and also a Godverse. So this is where your consciousness would reside. And even many scientists believe that there is another realm that has to exist in order for you to experience the physical world. Which, as I say, Nigel Kerner would refer to it as the Godverse. And he even says that your awareness and your will are not part of the physical world. They're part of this other realm. But this is something which mainstream, they don't really want to discuss. And the reason is because it empowers you. Because you realise you're not just a bunch of atoms. You're far more than that. We all are. Okay, and another person who is possibly being used to mislead people in the past is Albert Einstein. We made a program about him, and many of his claims top scientists now say were incorrect. And Dr. Alice Roberts, number 5 on the list of scientists, kind of a female version of Cox, depicted as a science geek. She started popping up in various programs, has a slightly alternative image with her dyed hair and nose piercing. However, she is clearly stolid establishment material. She did a program on the origins of humans. Yes, all races really did originate from the same source in Central Africa. She also does health programs on how we should eat what we're told to and do the exercise we're told to. Okay, so in the category of TV presenters, we've already discussed these guys. At number 7 on the chart, one of my favourites, David Dimbleby. Establishment stooge who fronts the weekly open propaganda mind control exercise Question Time. Question Time is a classic programme which uses the phony bone of contention. Has 2 arguments, which is discussing a phony issue, and the answer is always outside of the actual argument that they're discussing. Philip Schofield. Mr. Nice himself was complicit in the scuppering of the Lord McAlpine investigation. This is a viewer's comment, not my comment, by accidentally showing the nation a piece of paper with suspects' names on it. It is my opinion that he is a security service asset and paedophile protector. Now, this is the incident that the viewer is talking about, where Schofield supposedly prints off a list of paedophiles from some rogue website and hands it to Cameron. Now, I've discussed this with Neil Sanders on my show, and he's of the opinion that an event such as this is completely scripted from start to finish. And the fact that those names were accidentally seen by the camera would have been done on purpose. This was being done possibly to take control of this issue and maybe to garner sympathy for Cameron. And Neil Sanders compared it to the Nixon-Frost interviews of 1977, where Frost supposedly got some admissions out of a former president about things connected to the Watergate affair. But Neil Sanders alleges that this was scripted by the Pentagon. And it wouldn't surprise me if this is the same. All right, at number 9, Piers Morgan. I can hear the groans in the audience. Yeah, a creation of Rupert Murdoch. And at number 10... Now, I put this presentation together before this latest rubbish about Clarkson, so he would have been probably near the top, I would imagine, had I done this later. Now, this viewer says, has made it his comedy style to insult and demean other cultures and less fortunate people than himself. Now, to me, what I think's going on here with this Clarkson drivel, and Russell Brand as well, is they're trying to create anti-heroes. So Brand is put out to appeal to younger, more left-wing minded people. Clarkson is appealing to middle-aged, more conservative thinkers. And they're both, in my opinion, acting as sponges, because there's a lot of people who are disillusioned with mainstream media and mainstream politics. They don't buy into it. And these 2 guys, I think, are put out to soak up that interest and make sure it goes nowhere, to make sure those people don't find genuine alternatives to the mainstream media politics, and they put their faith in these fake heroes. That's what they're for, and that's what all these headlines you've seen are for. Okay. On TV presenters, number 11, Jon Snow, possesses the intelligence to know better, but still elects to shovel bullshit at us during the week on Channel 4 News. The Pope, could probably do a whole lecture on the power of the Vatican. It's a religious, capitalistic society in which the Pope is regarded as a messianic figure with the propaganda of the church media. Barack Obama, governed by the same type of individuals who hide behind the great financial interest. A Hollywood actor, in my opinion, that's all he is. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Somebody sent me a video of Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was governor of California, saying how we need to clamp down on illegal use of drugs in sport, which I thought was a bit odd. Yeah. Nigel Farage, we'll come on to Farage. Boris Johnson, number 8. There's a lot of groans. Yeah. Get it out your system. Yeah. Boris Johnson markets himself and is marketed as a lovable oaf, a toff with no airs and graces who is down to earth and likeable. Nothing could be further from the truth, as he is at least as bad as Cameron, willing to do whatever he's expected to by his string pullers in return for a little fame, power and glory. George Galloway at number 9, an interesting choice. This is the viewer's comment, not my comment. The man who started a crowdfunding project for £50,000 to make a documentary about Tony Blair, £250,000 later, no expose, but Georgie has had a makeover. The rebel politician, friend of Islam, and 9/11 official story stated believer. So what this person is talking about is Galloway was wanting to make a film all about Tony Blair called The Killings of Tony Blair, which is a double meaning, meaning the illegal wars and also the monies that he's made from giving speeches and that kind of thing, the killings of Tony Blair. But apparently Galloway is alleged to have said that he would make it once he got 50 grand, and it's never transpired according to this viewer. And the thing that puts a question mark over Galloway's head, in my opinion, is that he as far as I'm aware, he believes the official story of 9/11. I mean, how can anyone believe the official story of 9/11? Okay, next, Hillary Clinton. Well, more groans from the audience. All right. And in the category of sport and celebrity, somebody has voted for Jessica Ennis-Hill. Subconsciously promotes a certain way to look, which is unobtainable to the average woman. Used by the Bank Santander to attract young men and women with the sole intention of getting them to open a bank account and get them into debt. And this is part of the agenda. Keeping people locked into consumerist materialism, thinking they need the best of everything in order to be a proper person. And someone who also promotes this kind of thing is Karen Brady. Karen Brady, who was the managing director of Birmingham City Football Club at the age of 23. Now, there's an interview with Karen Brady and Piers Morgan, if you can watch it without being sick. I'm sure you could probably get it on the internet, but sort of, it's the idea that it's putting across is that the only way of measuring somebody's success is how much money they've made for themselves. It's pretty disgusting if you ask me. But if you look at Karen Brady's past, you'll find that she isn't a self-made millionaire as she's portrayed in these programmes. She was taken under the wing of David Sullivan, one of Britain's millionaire pornographers, and she lied on her CV in order to get a job at Saatchi & Saatchi. So she's not self-made millionaire, even though that's what they're putting forward. So they're fake for two reasons. Okay, the area of finance, we've got Alan Greenspan, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve. This viewer says he was a false financial prophet with a subversive agenda. And I think this is indicating that the groups that really control the central bank and the world's money are not those that they put forward visibly for people to actually see and question. They're puppets. And Max Kaiser, another interesting choice. I would imagine there's a lot of people in this audience watch RT, Russia Today, and for an alternative news source, but in my opinion, RT is as bad as the BBC because it's making people think they've got an alternative news source. The day that RT does a 2-hour-long interview with Dr. Judy Wood with all of the evidence in this book and Andrew Johnson, the most important book written this century, the day they do that, the day I will think RT is not just controlled opposition. And they give a huge platform to this guy, Max Kaiser, who has been promoting Russell Brand recently. All right. Now, the concept of using false heroes and role models goes back millennia, but it was spoken about by somebody called Yuri Bezmenov. Now, Yuri Bezmenov was a KGB agent. He worked for the Soviets in the 1960s, and he spoke about subversion because his job was to place false stories in foreign countries' media, create fake organizations and media organizations in order to subvert foreign nations and demoralize them. And on his chart, you can see in the category of ideas and culture, create false heroes and role models. And this is a way of manipulating the masses. So I'm just going to show you a clip from Yuri Bezmenov. So he defects to the West in the early 70s, I think, to Canada, and he starts giving lectures on the Soviet subversion techniques in the early 1980s. And here's a few clips from one of his lectures.
Subversion can be only successful when the initiator, the actor, the agent of subversion has a responsive target. It's a two-way traffic. United States is a receptive target of subversion. Distract them from learning something which is constructive, pragmatic, efficient. Instead of mathematics, physics, foreign languages, chemistry, teach them history of urban warfare, natural food, home economy, your sexuality, anything, as long as it takes you away. Take away the initiative from people. Take away the responsibility from naturally established links between individuals, group of individuals, and society at large, and replace them with artificially, bureaucratically controlled bodies. A slow substitution of basic moral principles. Where previously people settled their differences peacefully and legitimately, now we are getting with this court cases in the smallest irrelevant cases. We cannot solve our problems anymore. The society at large becomes more and more antagonistic.
Okay, remember that. Society at large becomes more and more antagonistic, because this is what the Soviet Union was doing in the last century. What it would do, it would target certain nations that it was going to try and convert into communist countries. These would be independent, sovereign nations, and it would practice subversion on them. So it wouldn't invade them and take control of them immediately. It would put subversives into those countries that would start fake organizations, start tinkering with the law and this kind of thing. And it might take 20 years of subversion to get those countries turned red and taken into the communist bloc. Now, Yuri Bezmenov has spoken at length about how they did this, and he said that if they targeted a country for subversion, so that it could be taken control of, it would go through 4 distinct phases. So they would start with demoralization. This is getting rid of the country's morals, so that people don't know truth from false, and that would be done by messing with the media and other organizations. So the country is just like a piece of jelly, can be steered in any direction. Then the phase 2 would be destabilization. This is when the spinal column of the country is grabbed and it's dragged into crisis. So it might be a civil war, or it might be a coup, or it might be a revolution, and eventually it can be normalized and taken into communism. Now the first process, demoralization, he describes it takes 15 to 20 years, and he says that's because that's how long it takes to educate the average person. Now it is my hypothesis that there is a constant program of demoralization right here, right now in the UK, by those who pull the strings of our government and remain hidden. I think that they are demoralizing the public permanently to prevent any kind of realization or awakening which would be able to challenge the people who are really running this country. And I've come to that conclusion because I've looked at Yuri Bezmenov's subversion chart. This is the first, just to point out, I don't think the agenda in the UK is to destabilize the country or take it into crisis. They've already got ownership of the country. It's a permanent phase 1. And as I said, I come to this conclusion because I've looked closely at Bezmenov's subversion. This is phase 1 here. This is the first 15 to 20 years where they're demoralizing the country. This is it here. This is exactly as it appears in Yuri Bezmenov's chart. So we can pick out things on this chart which we can see going on in the UK. So in education, create permissiveness, resulting in ignorance. I think if you get, let's say, an A-level maths paper from 1980, you compare it to today, you can see that standards have gone right through the floor, and people are coming out of education ignorant. There's no doubt about that. In the area of media, monopolise and manipulate the media, focus on non-issues to create an uninformed myopia. Myopia meaning you're not aware of the big picture. In culture, we've already discussed false heroes and role models, so their intention was also to break up families. We've seen a lot of families breaking up in our society today like never before. And the question you've got to ask yourself, is that being done via a subversion campaign or is it by accident? I say it's been done deliberately. In the area of health, focus on junk food and try to create enfeebled masses. You've just got to look around you to realise that people are not living healthy lifestyles and ask yourself, is that via a subversion technique, demoralisation, or is it by accident? I say it's been done deliberately. And various other sections. So what I've done, I've looked at this chart and I've come up with the UK demoralisation chart, which is an indefinite period. I've changed some of it. For example, I've changed religion to social groups because I think they're creating social groups or infiltrating them with the intention of disempowering people. And that's what I think all of these community projects are. Community projects where they set up quangos, give them a load of money, but they have all these strings attached to them. In my opinion, adult learning, all that crap, it's all about disempowering people, not empowering them. In education, reduce the standards and centralise the syllabus, which is what they've done. And I'm going to look at some other areas in the rest of part one of today's talk. So we've already looked at false heroes and role models, which the intention is to create ignorance, create an ignorant population. But it's a particular flavour of ignorance, where people don't realise they're ignorant. And also get people wrapped up into materialism, material goods, making people desire the lifestyle of the celebrities. Okay, let's look at another area. Now I've got on the area of life, race, manufacture division, and create antagonism and hatred. It's a controversial issue. Someone said to me the other day, well, Richard, you never tackle the issue of race, so you're obviously a shill. Okay, well, let's take a look at it. And I think the issue of race is used to create antagonism and hatred, which is what Yuri Bezmenov spoke about. We're all familiar with these sort of headlines, new migrant flood on way. But I would ask the question, are these headlines promoting a sober, intelligent debate about the issue of immigration, or are they creating fear? I would argue that, by and large, they're creating fear. I'm not saying there's not an immigration issue. I think there is. I think petrol is poured onto the issue and is ignited to get people in fear. Because once you're in fear, you think with a different mindset. You have a much more primitive sort of thinking once you're in fear of an issue. And I think that's what's going on. I'm just going to give you a simple example of why people don't really think with their brains on the issue of immigration. Let's just say that everyone in this room, we all go to another planet, and there's one island on that planet. So there's 100 of us, and each one of us have got £1,000. So some of us are farmers, some of us are builders, some of us are doctors, what have you. And we only need £1,000 each because that money is exchanged throughout the economy and it's fine. We're all living in peace and harmony. And two immigrants come along. One of them has got £100,000 and the other one has got no money. Every person on the island has got £1,000 each. Which one would it be in the best interest to let in your country? Which one would you let in? The one with the £100,000 or the one with nothing? The one with nothing, I'd agree with you. Because if you let the guy in who's got £100,000, he's got as much money as everyone in the island put together. So this guy would come and live and he wouldn't have to do any work. He could enslave the entire nation, have his house built, have all of his food grown for him, and he wouldn't have to do a day's work until the day he died. But not only that, by bringing his money to the island, we've got the same amount of resources on the island, but we've doubled the amount of money. So that means the value of money is halved. So everyone's pound in everyone's pocket becomes worth half of what it was before this guy was on the island. So in my opinion, every time you'd let this guy in, because this guy's going to have to do some work. He's going to have to grow some crops, which results in goods that he would sell and other people will benefit because he has produced those goods for other people. Now, it would be different if this guy had, say, 1,000 bags of potatoes or 1,000 bags of coal, i.e. assets, because fiat currency money is not an asset. It's not worth anything in itself. Money really is the ability to take an asset. So you would always let the guy in with no money who's prepared to work. Right? Now, when I was researching the Madeleine McCann case, I'm in Portugal and I'm at this bar and I'm talking to the barman and he's talking about this tennis club that he's in, which is full of expats. This is people who migrated from England into Portugal and they're living there permanently. They haven't gone there to work, they've gone there with their money to play tennis. And the three of them are sitting around the table with a newspaper on the table like this one. And all three of them are sitting looking at the newspaper saying, bloody hell, isn't it flipping disgraceful what's happening to our country? All these bloody immigrants. Right? And they're living in Portugal permanently. So the guy pipes up to them, he says, well, hang on, you're an immigrant of Portugal. And you know what they said? They said, oh, well, that's different, because we bring money. They thought that they were actually doing the Portuguese a favour by bringing their money there. Yeah? Absolutely deluded, completely deluded, because all they're doing by bringing their money there is pushing up house prices for local people and also introducing more currency, which is devaluing the local currency. So completely deluded. If you're going to let someone into your country, you let someone with no money in who's prepared to do work. And I would suggest that that's the majority of people who do come into the country. So it's double standards in a way. But as I say, I'm not saying there's not an immigration issue. I'm saying that it is blown up out of all proportion. And it is used to create antagonism. I mean, I would say that if I asked everyone in this audience, I'd probably get a different view on it. Everything from, say, we need to close the borders and let nobody in, to every person has the right to roam the planet freely and live wherever they like. Well, clearly the answer lies somewhere in between those two. Yeah? And indigenous people should be respected when people do move around the planet. So why can't there just be a simple, honest argument about that? Why is it such an antagonistic issue? And I suggest it's done deliberately because it's a great issue for getting people's backs up. Which, come on to this guy. Now, I would agree with a lot of what Farage says with regards to sovereignty. I don't think powers should be given to Europe and then possibly a world government after that, because he's against that, Farage. But I ask the question, has Farage been given a platform in order to create antagonism? Because I don't think he's going to become Prime Minister. All right, let's come on to another issue. Now, I've changed Yuri Bezmenov's chart. I've said I've changed the media into media and the internet, because clearly the internet is a massively important part of people's lives now. And there are two major issues with it that I think are, or at least one of them has been used for demoralisation, and that's social media. People are living huge parts of their lives within social media, and I think you could probably draw an entire new chart just for the techniques being used within social media in order to demoralise people within social media. But let's come on to one of the main problems on the internet that I would say is stopping the truth getting out to people, and that is something that you all probably know and love. This is one of the biggest problems on the internet. Here we go. Google. Now, it looks so innocent, doesn't it? Google. We're all familiar with that. Now, why do I think Google is one of the biggest threats to getting the truth out? Well, let's just do a search. Let's search for Madeleine McCann and see what we get. We get the result from the Express newspaper, the Metro, the Daily Mail, the official Find Madeleine page, the Telegraph, the Express, the Mirror, Vanity Fair, the Guardian, the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail. Every single one of them mainstream sources. My Madeleine films have been watched by nearly 500,000 people, and in my opinion are far more accurate than anything that has appeared in the mainstream media. So why aren't my films on there? Now, people would say, well, yeah, but you've got to go further down the list. But here's the problem. 95% of all web traffic goes to sites on page 1 of Google. So 95% of people will never go past that first page. And this, in my opinion, is a form of soft censorship. Most people are still getting their information from corporate mainstream sources. And why isn't Google being investigated by the Monopolies Commission? That's a monopoly right there, is it not? 95%, I would say that's a monopoly on the service industry that provides information services on the internet. They get 95%. So why aren't they being investigated? You see, people would say, well, you've got to type in a different search string in order to find more truthful sources. Well, people in this room might know that, but 95% of people who just go on page 1 of Google, they don't realise they're being misled in the mainstream media. They don't realise there's anything more to the Madeleine McCann case, for example. And the other thing with Google is now a verb, which I think is also very dangerous. I mean, if you go out to do your groceries, you don't say, oh, I'm just popping out to do a bit of Tescoing, do you? Or let's go out tonight and get Witherspoon, shall we? Yeah? Google is now a verb. I Googled it. By making Google a verb, you're putting all your faith and loyalty into one corporation. A corporation which I think needs to be investigated by the Monopolies Commission. And a corporation which doesn't even publish its algorithm. So you don't know whether there's any corruption in it ranking those mainstream sources first. Huge problem in getting the truth out. People think the internet is the answer, but we've got to tackle this if the internet is going to provide the truth to people. Okay, let's look at another area. In the area of law and order, this is a Yuri Bezmenov one, rights versus obligations, with the intention of creating less individual responsibility. Now, it's a tricky one to explain, but I'm going to try and tackle it. Let's just say someone fires a bullet at you and it hits you. You have the right to have them taken to court and sent to prison. But let's just say that we say, no, we want you to take personal responsibility for that and dodge the bullet. Yeah? You're not going to have the right to take someone to court who shoots you. That clearly is ridiculous. You need that right. But what if you're walking down the street and there's a loose paving slab? Should you take personal responsibility and avoid it, or if you fall over it and harm yourself, should you be able to sue the council? Well, that's maybe in the debatable category. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum. If you set off from your house and it starts pissing down with rain and you get soaking wet because you forgot to wear your coat, can you sue the council for getting wet? Well, clearly you can't. You take individual responsibility for not getting wet and wear a coat, yeah? So what I'm saying is there are hundreds of things that we do every day which involve risk, which could harm us. And we could, if we wanted to, give people rights for all of those risks. So anything harmful that might happen to you, we could say, well, we're going to give you the right. You're going to be able to sue the government for this, that, or the other, right? And what Yuri Bezmenov says is if you load people with rights, you give them too many rights, it completely screws up a society, because every little thing that happens negatively in your life, you're either taking someone to court, or you're taking a corporation to court, or you're taking the government or the council to court. And all people do is chase their tails in the court rather than take personal responsibility for their own lives and settle their differences without government involvement or without going to court, right? Now, we've all seen this. This is Merthyr High Street. Have you had an accident in the last 3 years? Well, I had diarrhea about 2 years ago. I didn't quite make it. Will you take it on a no-win, no-fee basis? Now, I'm not saying that the solicitors who do this ridiculous thing in the street where they ask people if they've had an accident, I'm not saying they're trying to demoralise the population. I'm saying the legislators that allow this to go on are. Because all you end up with is a whole load of trifles in the courts and people spending their lives with ridiculous molehills of issues. And that brings us on to the slavery issue. This is the government legislation that they've described as anti-slavery legislation, which is a complete misnomer. If you read the legislation, it's not legislation against slavery, against physical slavery, shackling someone and making them do forced labour. That's not what it's about. They've very slyly called it modern slavery. And what they mean is mental slavery. Because if you read the Act, what it entails is, if you ask someone to do you a favour, and they do that favour, and at some point later that person's not happy that they've done a favour for you, and they think you've taken their liberty away, they can have you arrested. So they're trying to bring in laws to prevent people from being taken advantage of. That's what the slavery legislation is. It's not against slavery. It's not protecting you against slavery. It's protecting you against being taken advantage of. Now, I've been taken advantage of a few times in my life, and what do? You learn from it, and you get on with your life. You don't think, oh, well, I've got rights now. I can go and sue that person, or I can ring the police because they've asked me to do this favour or that favour, right? The slavery legislation is going to cause absolute chaos. But it's a drip, 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 drip. People spending and being given the right so that they're not taking individual responsibility for their lives. It's a classic Yuri Bezmenov thing. But it's sold to you, we are going to give you rights. Anti-slavery legislation. It's altruistic. We're just protecting you. That's all it's for. We're giving you rights. No, it's not. It's to screw up society. That's what it's for. And all our MPs, I'm not sure whether they've voted on it yet, and they always put out these sob stories. You've probably seen them. There was one in Wales recently, some guy living in a caravan or something. Absolute bollocks. They're doing it to try and they're even trying to get people to snitch on other people. Have you seen someone being enslaved? It's in order to create less responsibility within society, and it's absolutely disgusting. We've gone this long without this legislation. Ask yourself, what's it really about? Okay. Now, in the area of health, well, you know, we could do a whole lecture on health and how people are enfeebled masses, or they're trying to create feeble masses. Focus on spectator sports in pubs, people spending all day drinking beer, watching sport on big screens, and also use the Mental Health Act to get more and more people on psychotropic drugs, which again creates enfeebled masses. Okay, somebody said, why did you put that subliminal of a Costa coffee cup in your talk? I was going to talk about soft drinks and what have you. Okay, now, in the area of MPs and politics, I've said create actors, shills and useful idiots and focus on fake issues. I don't actually think that MPs are politicians. If you look at the definition of a politician, it is someone who makes decisions which bring about real change in people's lives. I don't think any MPs have the power to make decisions which bring about changes in people's lives. I would argue it's all done outside of politics. And what politics is used for is fake issues. So, for example, the hacking scandal, I believe, is a complete fake issue. Listening to people's answer messages. Okay, it is an issue, but it's nowhere near as big as 9/11 or the murder of 56 people on the London Underground. It's a molehill that they make into a mountain. Another one is MPs' expenses. Yes, it is an issue, but it's no way as important as the fraudulent financial system. But they spend hours and hours and hours on these fake issues, and they're promoted by actors, shills, and useful idiots. Now, there's plenty of useful idiots in Parliament, but how do you create a good actor? How do you create a good fake MP that's going to big up these fake issues for you? Well, I think there are many ways that they're doing it, and one of them is linked to the issue of paedophilia, which has been all over our media fairly recently. And I asked the question, why is paedophilia often linked to people of influence and politicians? Because I think the media completely get the cart before the horse on this issue. Now, I'm going to show you a clip of me talking to Bill Maloney about this issue. If you're sensitive to this kind of thing, it's not very pleasant listening, so I'll just put that warning for anyone who's sensitive to it.
The intelligence agencies are the ones who are ultimately controlling some of these care homes and institutions.
Absolutely.
Because they have the power to prevent the police from doing a proper investigation, and B, make sure that things don't get into the media.
Well,
okay? and he suggests, and others have suggested, that they're used as blackmail traps for powerful people.
That's what I was just going to say.
Or money,
yeah.
or just snuff films and that kind of thing.
Yes.
So let's assume then that it does go right to the power at the top.
Paedophilia can control world politics.
Exactly.
World politics. Now, let me give you an example, right? If you look at Haute de la Garenne, right? Mm-hmm. Jimmy Savile. Now, Haute de la Garenne, what they do. But first of all, I've got to tell you that Jimmy Savile was often present at cabinet meetings in Israel. He was asked to go out there and sit in on cabinet meetings, mm-hmm. Jimmy Savile. Mm-hmm. God knows why. But
I'm just trying to get to because it's the crux. Do you know what I mean?
Let's get you're a politician. You're a politician, right?
Yeah, I understand.
I'm Jimmy Savile.
Yeah.
I'll say, Rich, you want a kid?
Yeah.
Come over to Jersey. It's a pucker place. We've got some beautiful kids. You can do what you want.
Yeah.
Come up, it's going to cost you this, it's going to cost you that, it's going to cost you a little favour. You go, all right, Jim, that's great. Yeah. You go over there, but you don't know when you're having sex with a child, or you're abusing a child, or you're torturing a child, or you're killing a child, whether you've got a baby there and you want to bite it to death.
Yeah.
Then
it's filmed without
it's
the
filmed.
Without
you
the
get home, DVD, or then would have been a VHS copy.
Yeah.
Comes in the post. So you see it. You're the politician, and then we say to you, "We've got this on you. Look at this film." And then you'll come back and say, "What do you want?"
So in essence, then, it's something which is these grotesque acts that people do. That's something which is kind of somehow, for whatever reason, ingrained in certain people.
Yeah.
And
the intelligence agencies, because the CIA have been involved in this kind of activity, actually training 9-year-old girls in how to pleasure men, and I think that's been admitted to, right? So they're using something which is there to as a power tool, effectively.
Yeah. Now, I would say all the intelligence agencies, all the secret services around the world, of every single country, the best thing that you can have really is, if you call someone a paedophile, and you can prove that they're a paedophile and they're a politician or whatever, you have then got them by the short and curlies, and they will do whatever you want.
All right, so this is what I mean by, I think they get the cart before the horse. The mainstream media seems to portray that people of influence, MPs and powerful people, abuse that power to then abuse children. No, I don't think it works that way at all. I think that people who are inclined that way are selected, they're picked out, probably years before they become powerful, and they are put into powerful places deliberately so that they can then be controlled from the outside. And if you don't think that this activity goes on, just listen to this clip from Ken Livingstone, former Mayor of London.
I was raising in Parliament up against Mrs Thatcher the Kincora Boys Home, where boys were being abused, and MI5 was filming it because they were hoping to be able to blackmail senior politicians in Northern Ireland.
All right, so let's be clear what Ken Livingstone is saying there. He's saying that our government, i.e. MI5, go into children's homes, install hidden cameras, then allow men to come in and abuse the children and film it without anyone's knowledge, and then use that footage to then blackmail those people. Right? And that's been funded by your taxes, according to Ken Livingstone. Now, let's just look at this article. This was recently in the Daily Mirror. It says, double agent sensation, British spies recruited pedo IRA chief. Spooks covered up sex abuse of girl 14 to blackmail terror boss. Spooks allegedly used pictures of an IRA leader abusing a girl of 14 to blackmail him into spying for them. Chief of Staff Joe Carhill was photographed by a covert unit in the 1970s. A security source said he was never prosecuted, and instead the pictures were used to turn him. He was a prized asset. So they're actually telling you in mainstream media that this is what they do. They secretly film someone doing a paedophilic act and then use that to recruit or blackmail the person. But it's okay because they're trying to prevent terrorism. Now, what judge made the decision that that man should not be prosecuted and that girl should not get justice because they're supposedly trying to prevent terrorism? Would they do the same thing to prevent a bank robbery or something more minor? Who is actually residing over these decisions? Nobody. It's just someone at MI5. So it's pretty disgusting in my opinion, and they're actually trying to justify this practice in this news article. It goes on. A source revealed that Carhill, who died in 2004, and this is something which I've noticed crops up again and again, you only hear about these paedophiles when people have died, and I'm going to come on to that, was being followed by a covert unit as he drove around Belfast when the pictures were taken. They apparently showed the paramilitary, then in his 50s, abusing a 14-year-old girl who was later identified. Now, I don't actually believe this little piece of the story. It's saying that he's driving around the car in the busy city of Belfast, abusing the girl in the car. Is it not more likely that the photographs were taken in an establishment similar to the one described by Ken Livingstone? I think it's probably more likely, but they're trying to justify the practice. The point there about the fact that we've only heard about this when he's dead, just think about it. If the intelligence agencies are blackmailing someone or recruit someone who they've got film of that they blackmail with, right? Would that person ever hold their hand up and say, I'm a paedophile, MI5 have got me on film? They would never do that, would they? Would MI5 ever admit it while that person's alive? Well, I don't think they ever would. Because if they exposed, let's say, Jimmy Savile for being a paedophile while he was alive, Savile would just stand up and say, well, no, they've been blackmailing me. They would blow the whistle on the intelligence agencies. And that, I think, is why we only find out about these cases when the person is dead. So Cyril Smith is another example. So I ask the question, how many of the current cabinet are being controlled using this method? I don't think anyone has the answer to that. But I do think that a lot of the stuff that's coming out in mainstream media about Scotland Yard investigations into historic child abuse, you've only got to look at Operation Grange in the Madeleine McCann case to realise that MI5 can manipulate Scotland Yard to run complete fake investigations as psychological operations. That's what the Madeleine McCann Operation Grange was. It was not an attempt to find Madeleine. So these historic child abuse investigations, I would take them with a pinch of salt. And the question I ask is, how many of these guys are being controlled using that method? Because I think that's the big question with regards to this paedophilia issue. Okay, now let's come back to the question that I asked at the beginning, which was, were the McCanns known to the intelligence agencies before the 2007 holiday? Here is some circumstantial evidence. Right, this is an official police document from Suffolk Constabulary, and it explains what the CATS system is. The CATS Child Abuse IT database is a case administration and tracking system. It allows for the effective supervision and management of all police child abuse investigations and referrals, including data checks, strategy meeting records, medical examinations, DVD interviews, police protection issues, joint investigation details, supervisor reviews, initial case conferences and review conferences. The CATS database remains the only child abuse database recommended by the Association of Police Chief Officers. Now, so that's what the CATS system is. It's a child abuse database. This is two documents from the Portuguese police files, because when the Portuguese police were investigating the McCanns, they requested that the British authorities do background checks on Kate McCann and Jerry McCann. So this is the background check that was sent. You can find it in the Portuguese police files. And they both contain this paragraph. It's in Portuguese. This is the translation, which I'm going to read verbatim. It's a little bit convoluted, but I'm going to read it anyway. It says, a search of the local section of the child abuse shows a registration number 19309 in the CATS system. A consultation with the DC SOAN from the department in question confirms that this is just a file reference, but as a complement to Operation Task System for the purpose of reference if any investigation should be necessary by the department. No work has been done on the basis of this file. Okay, so we can say that there is an entry against the McCanns in the CATS child abuse register, but there's no information against that number. So there's huge arguments, if you go on the internet, about what this really means. Some people say, well, the entry must have been deleted and that's been suppressed. Other people say, well, you can't make any conclusion because it's just a number, so it actually means nothing. All right? But there is an entry against the McCanns. Okay, the second piece of circumstantial evidence comes from statements made by the Gaspers. This was friends of the McCanns who were on holiday with them previous to their holiday in Praia da Luz, and they came forward after they heard about the Madeleine story, and the wife actually gave statements of a conversation she'd overheard between David Payne and Jerry McCann. David Payne was asking Jerry McCann a question about she thought it was pertaining to Madeleine and it was in a sexual context. And that statement is in the film, in the first film. Okay, now here's the third piece of circumstantial evidence. This is an email that I received after I put the first Madeleine films out. It says, I live in the Algarve. I have a good friend, Portuguese, who lives next door to a policeman in the GNR who were the police force who attended the Ocean Club on the night of the event. The policeman was one of those who was there. Shortly after the event, my friend told me that the policeman had told him he could not understand why the GNR had only got there 45 minutes, if I recall correctly, after the panic started, but that Interpol had been there within 15 minutes and had gone by the time the GNR arrived. Now, I don't know if this statement is true, but if it is, it's very interesting, because Interpol are the police intelligence sharing service between different countries. And if Interpol are involved, it probably means British authorities are involved. And Interpol are there before the local police. Now, Interpol in Portugal is 2 hours drive north of Praia da Luz. It's in Lisbon. So there's no way that they could have been there before the local police who were phoned when they've reported Madeleine missing. So what this could suggest is that British authorities knew all about the Madeleine issue before the McCanns had even telephoned the police for the first time. Right? So this is a piece of circumstantial evidence, the email that I've received. The fourth piece of circumstantial evidence is a video shot on, I think it's on a phone camera, and it's just before the McCanns are getting on the plane to go on their holiday. and one of the friends says to Jerry, "Cheer up, Jerry," and he says words to the effect, "I'm not effing going here to enjoy myself," right? Suggesting that there may be another reason why he was going to Pride of Loves. Now, I'm not going any further than that as to what this all could mean, right? But I'm saying that this is some circumstantial evidence that I think is very interesting and could shed light on possibly why there was some sort of massive cover-up took place. Okay, it's a bit of a dark subject to finish on, but hopefully part 2 is a little bit more light-hearted. And have a look at the DVD. As I say, it's a 3-hour-long film. I will be putting this online to watch free of charge, and people can buy this film, or they can download the image file and they can give it to whoever they want. They can make 1,000 copies if they want to. The intention is not to make money on these films. Okay, thanks for listening to part 1. We'll reconvene at about 9:30. Thank you. Cheers. Part 2, where I'm going to look at international subversion. Now, I've spoken a lot in the past about fabricated terror, and this is a term put forward by Dr. Nick Kollerstrom, author of Terror on the Tube. And if you're not aware of this concept, I suggest you go on my website, top left-hand corner, you'll find 2 links, 9/11 shows and 7/7 shows, where you'll find hours and hours and hours of evidence-based interviews all about fabricated terror. I do not believe that the mainstream media have told the truth about 9/11 nor the London bombings, and you'd need to watch quite a few hours of interviews and evidence on my website in order to understand what really happened. But this is not a lecture about the evidence. As I said, I recommend Dr. Nick Kollerstrom's book, Behind the Veil of 7/7, which pretty much proves that the London bombings were blamed on had nothing to do with it whatsoever. Right, now I wanted to bring attention of this to MPs, and I started a campaign in 2012 called Tell Your MP About 7/7, and I was encouraging Rich Planet viewers to download 40-odd pages from my website, take it to their MP, and ask them to consider the information that the London bombings were indeed a fabricated terror event. And I actually gave my MP, I went to see my MP in September 2012. I gave him a copy of Dr. Nick Kollerstrom's book. I gave him a copy of 7/7 Ripple Effect, which is a film that I recommend on the London bombings. I also gave him the 40-odd pages of documents. And he actually said to me, "It wouldn't surprise me." That's what he said. And a number of others managed to get letters from their MPs in response to our assertions that the London bombings were in some way fabricated. And all of these MPs wrote letters in response to those claims. And they were not all negative. Some of them, like this one, read, "Thank you very much for having taken the time to join me at the Victoria Hall at Grange-over-Sands Centre on Saturday morning in order to discuss your concerns about so many unexplained loose ends in recent events of national significance. I am pleased to confirm that I will look for the information that you have indicated as being so crucial to a full understanding of the threat to democracy from so many rich and self-interested people." So this MP, Tim Farron, that's probably about as far as he could go without losing his job. And there were a number of responses which showed that some of the MPs were taking note of this very compelling evidence. Now, I actually got an email from a Scottish MP saying that he would discuss this issue with his colleagues. And throughout 2013, more and more Rich Planet viewers were taking these documents to their MP, and some of them also were giving their MPs copies of Dr. Nick Collestrom's book. And this is a TV programme that I recorded with Dr. Nick Collestrom, where we actually went through all of the MPs' responses, and as I say, they weren't all negative. So this is something that MPs we know were talking about. Possibly not talking about it on the green seats of Parliament out in the open, but in the background I'm fairly sure that there were a number of MPs who were interested in this information and possibly don't buy the official story. Now I think that may have influenced what I'm about to show you, the fact that MPs were considering this information, because that obviously would be a huge threat to the people who organised 7/7, and I think this could have provoked what I'm going to show you now.
British Prime Minister David Cameron has described people who question the official account of the 9/11 attacks as non-violent extremists. The remarks made in his speech at the United Nations General Assembly have incited a political activist to voluntarily hand himself into the police as a so-called non-violent extremist. Press TV's Isa Ali followed him to Scotland Yard Police headquarters in London to hear his story.
A 9/11 activist in London has handed himself in to Britain's counter-terrorism police following the speech given by UK Prime Minister David Cameron to the United Nations Security Council last Friday. Nick Collestrom was responding to remarks made by Cameron equating people who question 9/11, 7/7 and Western policy towards the Middle East with Takfiri preachers who radicalise extremists.
But as the evidence emerges about the backgrounds of those convicted of terrorist offences, it is clear that many of them were initially influenced by preachers who claim not to encourage violence, but whose worldview can be used as a justification for it. And we know what this worldview is. The peddling of lies, that 9/11 was a Jewish plot or the 7/7 London attacks were staged. The idea that Muslims are persecuted all over the world as a deliberate act of Western policy.
Collestrom explained his decision to hand himself into police to Press TV.
David Cameron has redefined terrorism at the United Nations to include people who believe that the London bombings involve government complicity, or in some degree arranged, which I certainly do believe, and I published a book on the subject. And also, I believe 9/11 was an inside job. I do think Islamic nations are being selectively targeted, perfectly obvious. And if the police force are going by his directive, what constitutes terrorism, it seems to me that they need to arrest me. Well, we want to report a possible terror threat. We've got a bit of evidence. Right. And wondered if we could just come in and report it.
Right, regarding terror threats, so you'll have to go to the police station. Let me make a phone call for you.
The police declined to arrest Collestrom on this occasion, but he says non-violent extremism, as defined by PM Cameron, could see many Muslims arrested in the future for holding views similar to his. He describes this as yet another example of racial profiling. Isa Ali, Press TV in London.
So Nick Collestrom, a terrorist. I've heard it all now. And this is what David Cameron would have you believe. Extremists at work. Now, I was just as disgusted as Nick about David Cameron's words, but I reacted in a slightly different way. I wrote to the Prime Minister via my MP, and in my letter I said, "Dear Mr Cameron, in your UN speech you said the peddling of lies that 9/11 was a Jewish plot and the 7/7 London attacks were staged. In this statement regarding the 7/7 bombings, you are accusing me and thousands of British people of being liars. This is a demonstrably libelous statement. I challenge you to a public debate on a subject which you have brought to light, which is, were the London bombings a staged event? Having made such statements, you surely should back up the statements with evidence and then be challenged on your evidence in public. If you do not debate this issue in public with those you accuse of being liars, then your actions are that of a dictator. I await your response." So, I got a letter from the Home Office via my MP. Cameron was not prepared to debate in public, and they just referred me to the official inquest papers. Many of the Rich Planet viewers who took papers to their MPs were also directed to the official inquest papers. The completely phony inquest. An inquest which started with the presumption that those four who were blamed by the media for carrying it out must have done it. There was no evidence examined to test the guilt or innocence of the four. It was presumed from word go. The purpose of the inquest was to try and determine whether the security services or others could have prevented it. It wasn't to test who carried out the bombings. And this is an inquest with 56 murders and not a single post-mortem. How can you call that a proper inquest? A complete whitewash. And this is what they've fobbed people like me off with regards to this issue. Okay. Now then, when these fake events occur, such as 9/11 and the London bombings, many countries report these events as our media does. But not all countries buy into this international subversion. And I'm going to talk about one of those countries in the rest of today's talk. Can anyone guess what country I'm going to talk about? 2, 3 people said Malaysia. Spot on. I'm going to talk about Malaysia. Now, because it's a very interesting country and various things have happened pertaining to Malaysia. Which I think shed a lot of light on world geopolitics and subversion. Now, let's just take a look at this article here. We're all familiar with this alleged missing airliner, which supposedly went missing in March last year, and the official story is it's still missing. A massive jumbo jet packed full of passengers. They allegedly don't know where it is. And we look at this article here. It says, Missing Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, the 14 conspiracy theories that could explain where the plane is and what happened to it. Now, many people contacted me while this subject was being played out. They said, Richard, are you going to do a TV show about this? What do you think happened to it? And I didn't get sucked into this because it's very difficult to get first-hand evidence from incidences like this. How do you get first-hand evidence, let's say, from radar operators in Malaysia? You're relying pretty much on what you're reading in the newspapers and mainstream information, which we know is not reliable. So I didn't get sucked into this issue, and I didn't get sucked into any of the 14 conspiracy theories explained in this article. But I don't think you really have to look at the evidence of this case in order to shed some light on what most likely happened, right? And I'm going to look at some aircraft crash statistics, and I'm going to also look at the geopolitics of Malaysia, which I think shed light on what probably happened. But first, before we do that, let's listen to the words of John Lear. John Lear, who holds the world record for flying the most different types of aircraft. I was on a radio show with him recently, and this is what he said about MH370.
When all of this started, 8 hours after they made the turn, somebody knew where it was, but I didn't. Now, the way I deduced that somebody knew where it was is because on that airplane, there's many devices that send back to both Malaysian Airlines, Boeing aircraft, and Rolls-Royce, who made the engines, exactly where that airplane is, whether the engines are turning or not, and a whole bunch of other data. That stuff is sent back to those companies, and it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop even if the circuit breakers are pulled in the cockpit, for the main reason that those people responsible for that airplane and those engines want to know exactly what's going on and where they are. They're not going to put their company future on whether a pilot is going to pull a set of circuit breakers or not. So 8 hours after they made the left turn or turn to the west, that was what would have been when they ran out of fuel. That is where somebody knew where it was. Now, we haven't heard any official statements from Rolls-Royce, who know exactly where it is, or the Boeing company, who know exactly where it is. And I think that a lot of this might be, at least the Boeing part, might be part of the Anti-Terrorist Act, where they don't want it known that they know what's going on at all times, for the reason that they want to keep that secret should they need to use that information at some time. As far as Rolls-Royce, you never know what they want, but they never made any statement on this to my knowledge, but they do know where it is.
All right, so what John Lear is saying is that if it crashed, both Boeing and Rolls-Royce would know exactly where it is. If it landed, both Boeing and Rolls-Royce would know exactly where it is. And he's even given you a suggestion as to how that information may have been suppressed by using anti-terror legislation to tell those companies that that information is secret and it cannot be made public. So that tells me that probably NORAD or the NSA would know exactly where that plane was. And that in turn tells me that this is possibly some kind of PSYOP, psychological operation. But let's look at some other information first. I spoke about Malaysia in my last year's talk, and I said that I thought that it was on America's hit list because it's Islamic, it's non-democratic, but it also has a very low US approval rating. And one of the reasons why it has such a low US approval rating is because of the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal, which has barely been reported in the UK. Now, if we, I'm just going to draw a timeline here. If we go back to 2011 and draw the geopolitical timeline for Malaysia. Now, this is Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, and he was Prime Minister of Malaysia for 22 years. And he was not happy with The Hague. This is the International Criminal Court in Holland. And that's the court where if a country illegally invades another country or carries out war crimes or what have you, that's the court where prime ministers and presidents should be put on trial and tried for international war crimes. And he was not happy with that court. He felt that they should be putting Bush and Blair on trial for the invasion of Iraq. So because he wasn't happy about it, he actually set up his own war crimes tribunal entitled the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal, which he set up in 2007. So this is the former Prime Minister of Malaysia setting this up, so it's got the approval of the Malaysian government, and they held several tribunals. And this is a photograph from one of them. Now I'm going to show you a clip from one of these tribunals. This is a 4-day-long tribunal where they put Bush and Blair on trial. They actually had defence lawyers representing Bush and Blair and prosecution. But I've condensed it down to about 5 minutes, just to give you a flavour as to what was going on in Malaysia in 2011, because this has not been reported in British media. Now before I do that, before I actually show you this clip, anyone who knows this? Anyone knows who this guy is? Anyone recognise him? No? Come on, someone must know who it is. Alfred Weber, that's the guy. Now Weber, Dr. Alfred Weber, when I did my 9/11 analysis of the 50-odd video clips of Flight 175 and compared that to the radar paths, and I published all of that information, Weber contacts me. Weber is interested in the UFO subject, exopolitics, 9/11. He has a radio show, but he's also an international lawyer. So Weber contacts me, he says, I'm very interested in your research and I've written an article all about it. Would you come on my radio show? So I read his article and I said, well, look, Weber, that article is mixing in a whole load of crap, basically, that I don't approve of. I want you to rewrite that article. I want you to retract your original article, which is basically muddling up my research, and I want you to put out a new correction. And I never heard from him. Now, Andrew Johnson has also crossed swords with him, because Andrew Johnson, Weber was conducting an interview with a woman who was talking about Dr. Judy Wood, and when this woman mentioned the research of Dr. Judy Wood, Weber pipes up, without referring to the name Dr. Judy Wood, please explain why you think HAARP was involved in 9/11. So in other words, Weber was steering the conversation, and Andrew Johnson wrote an article about that. The point being that I believe, and I have done for probably at least 2 years now, that Weber is some form of CIA asset. Yeah. So the point being, they've got their spy at the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal. America have got their spy on the inside, which I find very interesting. Anyway, let's take a look at this clip.
The two accused, George W. Bush and Anthony L. Blair. We have emailed this to info@tonyblairoFfice.org. We have served this also on the Embassy of the United States of America and the British High Commission. We believe that this service is effective. We have had no indication from the defense that they are challenging this service. The second accused, Tony Blair, was in Malaysia on the 28th of October 2011, and we attempted to tried to serve him as well to ensure that he was abundantly informed of the charges. He was officiating a function here at the Mandarin Oriental, but we were unable, our people were unable to effect service because there was considerable security. He was whisked away right past our people who were waiting to serve it on him. And we tried to inquire as to where he was staying, but I think security was such that we were unable to effect service on this gentleman.
So considered not served. Considered not served.
On that day was not served, but we have already effected service through the other modes that we have just
Oh
described.
yes. We were now talking about the incident. He was here.
He was not served. Yes,
He was not served.
We're just showing the strenuous efforts we have made
Alright.
to try to secure the attendance.
Go on.
And finally, the fact that this trial is going to be today has also appeared in the Washington Post of 15th November 2011 as a news item, as well as the Daily Telegraph of the United Kingdom.
Charge number 1 is against George W. Bush and Anthony L. Blair. The accused persons had committed crimes against peace in that the accused persons planned, prepared, and invaded the sovereign state of Iraq on 19 March 2003 in violation of the United Nations Charter and international law. On 19 March 2003, the United States of America and the United Kingdom launched a war against Iraq without the sanction of the United Nations and without just cause whatsoever. During 2002, Bush and Blair, without the sanction of the United Nations Security Councils, directed air strikes against Iraq in order to degrade Iraq's air defenses in preparation to invade Iraq in 2003. Under the UN Charter, there is no right for implied authorization to take unilateral decision to use force against a sovereign country, except in self-defense in circumscribed circumstances. Blair had, in testimony to the Chilcot inquiry on 14 January 2011, admitted that the then Attorney General, Peter Goldsmith, advised that the further security solution after SCCR 1441 was obligatory under international law to authorize the use of military force. In any event, it is now a well-settled established fact that, which is in the public domain, that Iraq did not possess any weapon of mass destruction. This information was willfully ignored by Bush and Blair and demonstrates that Bush and Blair knowingly contrived to use an utterly false basis to invade Iraq several years later, that is in 2003. On 24 September 2004, the then UN Secretary General Kofi Annan also weighed in to state that the war against Iraq was illegal. Bush and Blair have over the years since the war admitted that they knew or believed the intelligence reports on weapons of mass destruction to be unreliable. And yet they proceeded unilaterally to wage war based on a false and contrived basis. More than 1.4 million Iraqis have been killed.
Right, anyone remember seeing that on BBC News? Breakfast telly? So that tribunal found Bush and Blair guilty of war crimes. They then held another tribunal in May 2012 where they found Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld and all of these others guilty of conspiracy to commit war crimes, specifically torture. They then held another tribunal in November 2013 where they found the State of Israel guilty of genocide of the Palestinian people and Amos Yaron, who I think is a military person, guilty of crimes against humanity. And do bear in mind that when they were running these tribunals, they were sending all of their information to The Hague after they'd come to these verdicts. They're saying, well, look, we've run these independent tribunals. You really need to put these guys on trial in the proper court that can get them locked up. So we then had MH370 happen in March 2014, this alleged missing aircraft. So Obama then goes over to Malaysia in May, a few months later, May 2014, and holds a press conference with the Malaysian Prime Minister, our Hollywood actor. And in those meetings, Obama's standing there saying, well, the Americans are doing everything we can to help Malaysia find this missing airliner. Absolute lie, in my opinion. I think Obama knows what's happened to that plane, and I did point out that I think I can see things in the body language of these clips that Obama knows that Malaysia is on the hit list. And none of the war crimes tribunals are discussed publicly at this press conference. Okay, so we then had a number of very negative stories pertaining to Malaysia come out in our media, which was beyond coincidence, in my opinion. We had the Gareth Huntley story, this guy who allegedly had his throat cut while he's backpacking in Malaysia, with photographs like this one, which in my opinion is saying, well, you can't trust the Malaysians, they're a militaristic tin pot dictatorship, and they're putting the lives of our Westerners at risk. Okay, we then had MH17 downed in the Ukraine, allegedly shot down by a missile. And they were even putting a negative spin on Malaysia with this incident. They said, well, Malaysia should not have flown that aircraft over a war zone, and that's why it got shot down. We then had a further major story which was plastered all over our mainstream media with the word Malaysia on the front pages, because there was 2 medical students who were allegedly murdered in Borneo. Now, I'm not saying that these are not genuine murders and these are not genuine incidents. What I'm saying is, coincidentally, we've got all this negativity pertaining to Malaysia. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you some aircraft crash statistics, which I think shed some light on this story. This graph shows the number of commercial aircraft flights from 1994 to 2013. So in 1994 there were 15 million commercial flights. In 2013 there were 25 million. 25 million per year. So you can see how air travel has increased over the last 30 years or so. Okay. Now, this graph here, I got this from planecrashinfo.com. This shows the number of plane crashes per year of commercial airliners that were carrying more than 19 people. And you can see from the sort of early 90s how the number of crashes has come down drastically, even though the number of flights has gone up significantly. So in 2013, there were 7 aircraft crashed. And in 2014, just 6 out of 25 million flights. That's how safe air travel is today. Very, very safe, at an all-time high. This is the total number of deaths in commercial air travel. In 2013, it was just 200 out of 25 million flights. And in 2014, it was 800. Now, let's just plot those figures on the screen. In 2013, we had 25 million flights. Just 7 of them crashed, with approximately 200 deaths. If we consider Malaysian Airlines, I read that 43,000 passengers travel per day. If you average that at about 150 and spread that over a year, you come to around about 105,000 flights. Now, if you divide that over 25 million, you find that the Malaysian Airlines is less than 0.5 of all air travel. So Malaysian Airlines is not a big airline. It's not one of the biggest. It's less than 0.5% of all commercial flights. So let's take a look at what happened in 2014. We had MH370 with 239 deaths, and we had MH17 with 298 deaths, both of them Malaysian Airlines flights. A total of 537 deaths from one single airline, which consists of less than 0.5% of all air flights. Now, I think you'll agree that just looking at these cases statistically, these suggest that they're not accidents. Would anyone agree with me? Statistically, that looks out of place to me. It looks like there's some funny business going on when you consider those figures. So, and when you then add in all of this, putting the likes of Bush and Blair on trial and then telling The Hague to go and put them on trial, I suspect that the MH370 was a psychological operation done deliberately just to nudge the public's perception into thinking that Malaysia is a state that cannot organise its affairs and really needs to be regime changed. That's what I think is going on here. Because Malaysia don't have any weapons of mass destruction. No one would ever believe that if they spun that in the media. Yeah? So they have to manufacture an excuse in order to get rid of this rogue nation. And that's what I think is going on with both of these missing or downed airliners. Now, we then had, in December 2014, I read that Obama actually played a round of golf with the Malaysian Prime Minister. So, was that some kind of ultimatum? And then, just, 3 or 4 days ago, there was a helicopter crash. This is the Malaysian Prime Minister. 2 of his aides that were very close to him were killed. So, is this another warning? Okay, so just come back to this article, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, the 14 conspiracy theories. 14 conspiracy theories. And this is one thing that I've noticed, because I'm convinced that this was a psychological operation, and there is a group that do know where that aircraft went. When they put that into the mainstream media, they know that maybe 99% of people will believe that story, will believe their propaganda. They've got the mainstream media bought and paid for. But they also know there's going to be a small percentage who listen to John Lear and realise they're talking bollocks, right? So what I've noticed that they do is that they chuck out several conspiracy theories just to confuse those who don't believe the official story. And then they write articles like this one, taking the piss out of people who don't believe the official story. The 14 conspiracy theories. And I noticed that in this article, the main conspiracy theory that they did try and debunk the most was the thing had landed at Diego Garcia. And I think a lot of people suspect that it may have landed at Diego Garcia. But as I said, I've not actually looked at any direct evidence for that. But I think it's possible. Okay. Now let's come on to interplanetary subversion, because I think it's going on. And last year I was contacted by a researcher called Douglas Gibson, and he had been looking at many of the images that are allegedly taken from the surface of Mars by NASA's various landers and rovers over the years, and he's found these anomalies in them which suggest that they're probably being taken on Earth. So I looked at all of his evidence, and I gathered all that evidence and I put it into a 50-page document called A Hypothesis: The Opportunity and Curiosity Mars Rovers Are Situated on Earth. In other words, it's a hypothesis where I'm suggesting that they're actually fooling us with these images and they're not coming back from Mars. I'm not 100% on this, but we did put a lot of evidence together in 2 TV programs. Some of you may have seen those TV programs where we looked at a lot of the Mars rover images with a very, very critical eye. So just to summarise, in 1976, this was the first alleged unmanned craft which landed on Mars. It's called the Viking mission. There was 2 identical craft. They did a few soil experiments and they've sent back images. They're now basically mothballed or redundant. They're not functioning anymore, but they're allegedly still there on the surface of Mars. So through the 1980s and 1990s, they ran a couple of projects, and then in the mid-2000s we had the Opportunity and Spirit rovers. One of them conked out in about 2011, but the other one is still functioning today, or so NASA allege. We also had the Curiosity rover mission, which allegedly landed in 2012 to great fanfare. So this is the Curiosity rover, which is about the size of a car, and the Opportunity rover. These are supposedly still sending back images. Now in the program we looked at lots of images, and I'm going to show you a few of them in today's talk. This is one of them on the left. This is sent back by the Spirit rover, and it seems to show some kind of lichen or growth on this rock, and you can even see in between the rocks. This is it compared to Earth lichen on the right. And remember what Brian Cox said in part 1, that we might find some kind of microbial life, i.e. life that you would look at through a microscope. right? This is not microbial life. This is complex life on the side of a rock, if that's indeed what it is. We also looked at images such as this one, which Douglas Gibson asserts is some kind of vertebrae from a sea creature. He believes either a whale or a walrus. We looked at this image, a very interesting image, which was of a large panorama, but if you zoom into that red square, Douglas Gibson is convinced that this is some kind of rodent. Now, much of the rover testing was done at a place called Devon Island, which is the largest unpopulated island in the world in the Canadian Arctic, and native to that island are Arctic lemmings. And Douglas is convinced that that's what we're looking at here. He even points to this mark on the back of the neck being present in the image. Okay, now this image doesn't look very impressive to the untrained eye, but fossil experts are convinced that this is indeed a crinoid fossil taken by the Opportunity rover. And here's it compared to an Earth. This is an Earth crinoid fossil. You can see here where you've got these two sort of parts which meet, similar to the left-hand image, which has allegedly come back from Mars. Here's another comparison with an Earth crinoid and the Mars crinoid. Now, we also discussed the colours on Mars. This image here shows the colour calibration unit, because on some of the rovers, this is the Spirit rover, they have this little module, looks like a joystick, and it has these 4 lobes on it, and they are so that they can calibrate the colours correctly on their images. So this joystick, it should look like this in the photograph, with the blue, orange, green and brown lobes. But you can see in this image, if you zoom in on it, the colours are all wrong on these lobes, which is proof that NASA have used colour substitution in their images. And the big question is, why are they doing that? Why have they been doing that? Now, the image on the left here, this is the first image which came back from the Viking mission in 1976. And shortly after they put that out, they said, oh, we've made a mistake, it doesn't look like that. This is the real image, right? They said, oh, there's dust in the atmosphere, so we got that one wrong. So this is what it looks like. Now, in the hypothesis, we put forward that the reason why they're doing this is because this is probably taken on Earth, and it doesn't look enough like an alien planet, which is why they're messing with the colours. That's what we put forward in this hypothesis. What other reason would they have to keep making these Mars images look like they've got red sky and red soil, when we know they're messing with the colours? All right, now, after these programs aired, I was contacted by quite a few people. I got a lot of emails, and 2 of them academics attached to 2 different universities that were determined to go through my hypothesis and prove me wrong on all of the evidence and convince me that these craft were in fact on Mars, which I thought is interesting that they're going to such lengths. I think one of them was a geologist and the other one was some sort of microbiologist of some kind. So this guy here, he's taken this image that Douglas Gibson is convinced is some kind of vertebrae, and he's basically saying, well, this is all geology and it's just the way that the light is shining. Jury's out for me on this. Some of the other images that they did manage to explain away was the one that we said was a plank of wood. He did show images of other rocks which look similar, so the jury's out on that one for me. The other one was a walrus arm bone that we suggested. Now, with that one, he showed that the scale of the bone was too small, because he compared it to the tyre tracks of I think it's the Curiosity rover. All right, so some of them have been successfully explained away, without a doubt. And I'm going to write another update to the hypothesis with all of this evidence in, because something which Dr. Judy Wood told me, author of Where Do the Towers Go, former professor of engineering mechanics, she said, Richard, you know what you do? You just chuck your evidence out to the skeptics and let them tear it apart and see what comes back, because then you'll get closer to the truth, because you'll find out the evidence that they can't debunk. Which brings us on to this image. Okay, so both of these scientists said that they thought that this was just a rock that happened to look like a rodent. Now, okay, that might be the case, because if you think about it, there are thousands, maybe even millions of images of rocks that they've published from Mars, so maybe one of them may just so happen to look like a rodent. So what this guy did was this, he said, well look, I've found another image taken of the same group of rocks from a different angle on a different day. And obviously, a rodent's not going to hang around for 2 days, is it? So he's saying that you can see from this other angle that it's actually just two rocks, that your eye is tricking you into thinking it's some sort of rodent. So this was the image that he found, and he's saying that that rock there is this rock here, and that and that one there is that one there. Okay, so I agreed with him on that. If we zoom into them both, there's our lemming. Okay, so what he's saying is that this rock here is that rock there, and this rock here is this rock there. And he's claiming that this rock and that rock look like the lemming when viewed from this angle, if you see what I mean. And he's saying there's the nose of the lemming. Now, I actually think that there's a rock behind whatever this is there. It's a different colour, it's a different texture, yeah? So I think that that rock there is possibly that rock there. So I'm not sure that this object is in this picture. I don't know what everyone else thinks. Do you think that this object, whatever it is in that image and is actually these two rocks, or do you think it's missing? Because if this is a rodent, right, according to what they tell us about the atmosphere on Mars, it's less than 1% of the Earth's atmosphere. There's no way an animal with lungs that breathes could survive on Mars, right? So I emailed him back and I said, well, actually, I don't think the object is in this image, and I think you've proved me right. So I didn't hear from him after that. So I don't know. I mean, maybe we need some image analysis done on it. But I suspect that if that is a lemming, then it's clearly been taken on Earth. It's not been taken on Mars. But this is the clincher. This is much stronger evidence. I know it doesn't look as impressive, but believe me, it is. Because neither of these scientists could explain the image on the left. And they both said it looked like some form of biology. Right? So they're saying that this is a crinoid fossil. And it's allegedly come back from the Opportunity rover. So why isn't Brian Cox talking about that when he's speaking to these school children, that they've actually found life on Mars, according to this photograph? And here's the other comparison that I showed you before. And what is a crinoid? What is a crinoid that we have a fossil of in this image? A crinoid is a sea creature, swims about the sea. It's not a plant, has a skeleton, and attaches itself onto rocks and feeds and that kind of thing. So this is a fairly advanced life form that, according to the NASA images, existed on Mars at some point. But I question that. I question, well, is it just an image of an Earth crinoid? Now what I did was I sent links to the programs that I produced about Mars and asking all of these questions to 5 Mars rover NASA scientists. These have all worked on or are linked to the Mars rover programs. And I said, look, can you watch these 2 TV programs, because I want you to explain why is there a rodent in one of these images, why is there a crinoid fossil, I want an answer to this. So none of them replied, but in NASA there's actually 2 Robert Mannings. There's the one at the top there who's the Mars Curiosity rover chief engineer. So this is a top engineer on the Mars Curiosity program. And I sent my email to the wrong Robert Manning, who designs aerials or something. So he forwards my email to the other Robert Manning from the Curiosity rover program. So I get a reply from this Robert Manning, and I think the only reason why he replied is because he got the email from someone else in NASA. So this was his reply. And I'm going to publish all of these emails. He said that I occasionally get letters and email from goofy people, but you are not in that category. You and your colleagues are very intelligent, and at least so far the questions you pose are really well thought through. In fact, you all remind me of many of my colleagues. That is a good thing, by the way. At least for the questions you posed in the first 2 videos. Now, the first 2 videos were about 25 minutes. We didn't contain any of these images that I've showed you. We were questioning the electrical characteristics of the rovers in that part. He said, I believe I can answer most or all of them. I will caveat that by saying that I am short on time in the next couple of weeks, and I am a terribly slow typist. So written answers will not be quick. If you don't mind, would you be able to send me a list of your technical questions in priority order? It would inspire me to be a bit faster, and I can do a little at a time. So great. So we've got one of the key players on the Curiosity rover agreeing to answer all of my technical questions. So I replied to him, I said, "Many thanks for your reply. The first two parts of the show are background information looking at things which might be considered questionable. Parts 2 and 3 contain much better evidence that something is not what NASA is claiming, in particular the fossil identified by a NASA scientist as a crinoid." So I got together with Andrew Johnson and we drew up 25 technical questions for this engineer to answer. And this should be child's play for an engineer at NASA to address. So we're asking him all sorts of questions. Question 8 here, I'm asking him for signed off test procedures, because when you develop a new product, if it's going to work in a harsh environment, there's generally batteries of tests over months where you would, for example, take the rover down to minus 100 degrees C and then up to 20 degrees C and simulate its environment and simulate the atmospheric pressures and that kind of thing. So I'm asking for all of those test results to prove that it can function as they have claimed, because I don't think you can determine that from the design. It's in the test results. All right, Andrew's sending them links to images that Andrew's been talking about for years, anomalous images of Mars which have never been explained properly. And also here I actually mentioned the crinoid fossil. I'm saying, well, do you think it's from Earth? Why haven't NASA announced life on Mars if there's a crinoid fossil there? Okay, so he replies, he answered one question about how the batteries were kept warm. He said, "In reading your list below, it really sounds like you are both a skeptic, a good thing, and that you have already made up your mind. Would that be correct? If your intent is not to listen with an open mind, I would have at the outset no chance to inform your curiosity and legitimate skepticism. What reason do I have to continue typing?" So he answered one question, and I've never heard from him again. All right, and I've re-emailed him, said, "Robert, come on, you promised to answer these questions." Now, in my job as an engineer, if I received a list like that, someone questioning my very existence, my very reason for getting out of bed in the morning, I'd want to prove myself right. So he's running away from the evidence, which is a common theme with people at NASA. So I've said to him, "Look, thank you for answering the question. We are skeptical. I can state 100% that neither Andrew nor myself are decided either way on where the rovers are. In fact, in the hypothesis, I state that on current evidence, I am about 75% the rovers are not on Mars. Andrew states quite categorically in the programme, I am not saying the rovers are not on Mars. Our minds are definitely not made up. We are genuinely open-minded. Being open-minded and willing to alter one's opinion according to new evidence is essential to get to the truth." And I've never heard from the guy again. Now, and here he is, Robert Manning, when they landed the Curiosity rover on Mars, because I really do recommend you watch this news conference, because their engineers are being asked pretty basic questions by journalists, and they don't know the answer to a lot of them. And they just look like a bunch of Hollywood actors, if you ask me. Here he is, hugging his pals. What's the ultimate goal of these missions? As you heard Brian Cox in part 1, the ultimate goal is to search for life, not to land the thing successfully. It's to search for life. So if they're having this huge party, this huge celebration, whooping at each other and giving each other high fives and cuddling each other, why aren't they having a crinoid party? We found the crinoid. We found the life. Why not? That's a massive question. And I think the answer is because this was not taken on Mars. It was probably taken on Earth. Because I think what's happening is that the team at NASA probably think the thing is on Mars, and the people who are in the Canadian Arctic steering it about or monitoring it, it's possibly accidentally come across this fossil and they thought, "Oh no, you've let it go next to a crinoid fossil. They're going to think there's a crinoid on Mars." And you know what they did with this evidence? Because the Opportunity rover has a device on it called a rock abrasion tool. They actually destroyed the whole thing. So, let's go and have a crinoid party after today's lecture, shall we? And NASA, as we know, stands for Never a Straight Answer. And if you look at the Apollo program as well, I've covered the Apollo program extensively on Rich Planet, and there's huge question marks over what the Apollo program was really about, and the moon landings and all the rest of it. And in my opinion, I've held this view for quite some time now, that NASA is a cover organisation to pacify the public with regards to space, when the NSA, the National Security Agency, they're running the real space program, and they've got the real spacecraft, and they're not based on rockets either. They're silent, and they can go much further than people realise. NASA is a cover organisation, and that's why we get such crap from people like Robert Manning. All right. Now, over the last sort of 5 or 6 years, I've concentrated on what I would describe as reactive activism. In other words, I know that 9/11 is a lie, and I've tried to expose it, so I've reacted to something which has happened. I know that the London bombings are a lie, I've reacted to it, and I've tried to expose it. Derek Bird, Madeleine McCann, all of these incidents that I think the media have lied to us about, I've reacted to it. So it's reactive activism. And I'm wanting to have a little bit of a change of direction with Rich Planet and go into a more proactive mode. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, somebody that I had on my TV show recently called Derek Willis is a good example of a proactive project, because in the 1990s he was building his own rockets, and he actually got one of them up to 5 kilometres in height. He was building another one, and he wanted to get it into orbit, but he was thwarted, which is quite an interesting subject to study, civilian space programs. This is people independent of government trying to get things in orbit. And it's very interesting to look at all of the groups that have attempted that, and they've all been knocked on the head. And the question is why? Now, Derek Willis here, what he's got in his hands there is a satellite, that's the actual size of the satellite, covered in solar panels. It's got HD cameras on it. This is a rocket motor. And there's a company in America which will actually launch your own personal satellite and put it in orbit. And Derek Willis is wanting to use the rocket motor to get it into a particular, very specific orbit, because he's convinced that there's an ancient alien satellite over like 12,000 years old or something, which came from the star system of Aldebaran. And he's wanting to go and try and photograph it. So that's an example of proactive activism. In other words, he's not reacting to something that's happened on the Earth. He's just doing his own research. Okay. And another example of a project that I'm launching, you may have seen my latest TV programme where I demonstrated the Stan Myers water fuel cell that I've been developing. And this is an alleged free energy device. So over-unity devices are devices which you can allegedly disconnect your home from the mains, plug it into your own over-unity device, and you can get power forever without actually having to pay an electricity bill. And similar for motor vehicles. Now, there are a number of people who are alleged to have developed over-unity devices over the years, and they've all either been suppressed, bought off, or murdered, or what have you. They've all been covered up in one way or another. So what this project will do is, I've got a list of alleged devices, and there are patents that you can look at. And I've had a lot of interest from quite a few engineers who want to help me in the project to try and build some of these over-unity devices based on information which is available. And I'm intending to test them to see if there's any truth in the over-unity technology. I don't know whether there's any. I don't know whether they work. Maybe they do. I don't know. But certainly, Stan Myers, I believe, was murdered because of his water-powered car. And as I say, we're looking to explore some of that, which is an example of proactive activism. So thanks very much for listening today, and please do take this advice. Throw your television set out of the window. Believe none of what you hear, including me. Don't believe me. Believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night. Thank you.